So yeah, there's plenty of of greening to be done, and I especially like that there's some examples in the Middle Ages record of that actually as a verb as well. Constantly talking about what it is to verb things rather than be not just reified but kind of crystallized as a noun.
Yes, I think it helps that she had died so early in the millennia, uh, and therefore leaves hundreds of years to green the world with her own greening, uh,
hmm
to fulfill
hmm
her own prophecies.
Heck yeah, that's the surest way to be a good prophet, right? To
Yeah,
make it
that
happen.
absolutely. If yeah, there's a certain the relationship with prophecy, right? Of the unavoidability of fate, even through your own meddling, like Greek myth par excellence. So, hello everyone. Uh, Welcome to some episode of Radio Free Golgotha.
Hi, thanks for being here. Thanks for being with us. Happy Hildegardmas, everyone. I
Everyone, yeah.
hope it finds you good and juicy.
Uh,
Yeah.
it is indeed the 39th episode of Radio Free Golgotha, and we are convening this day of Hildegard to bring to you another episode, lovingly Sesame Streeted through the predicted course of I'm trying to be poetic and it's just not working. It's like this is like they say when the paper is written well that the ending writes itself.
hmm
I don't know what it means that the beginning is not writing itself, but it is what is where I'm going to go with that. But it is the Feast of Saint Hildegard of Bingen. This is an interesting choice because I think all our choices are interesting. Nothing to begin with of interest, but that we have actually covered Hildegard of Bingen as a dead magician on the Saint Raphael episode that we did with Vanessa Irena way back.
Mm.
Several years back now, perhaps more than several. So we are deliberately using a dead magician and who is also a saint and coming back and revisiting her and kind of expanding on some of the topics that come alongside her as a celebration of this saint that is so beloved within the witch community, especially like yes, the herbalist community, but like herbalist witches. This is your saint to a lot of people. This is a saint that people are very excited about within various magical communities. Feast being September 17th, only canonized fairly recently.
Yeah.
I grew up with her being Blessed Hildegard, and now she is indeed Saint Hildegard. But
Yeah,
yeah,
what do they call that? We can get into this, obviously. Equivalent canonization, is that the term? From Benedict
yes,
16th? Yeah. Yeah. And there were like four other efforts to canonize her, and this was the first one done by or attempted by the more formal Roman form of it, I believe. Yeah, we can get into that. Again, another example of a saint to popularize a person too popular not to be saint.
yes, almost like the pre-congregation saints that we exist already, Saint Stephen and things like this. We don't bother worrying about whether or not Stephen is a saint.
Mm.
But it is interesting that there are several things that I hate to say that Benedict did in the favor of saints, right? But he is
Mm-hmm.
also following JP2, who is sometimes known as a saint maker,
Mm.
just more saints than any other pope in history.
Huh.
And kind of followed and sued and did a lot of saints that have been waiting for a long time, including kind of basically saying, we already love Hildegard enough.
Yeah.
Is that his German connection? We shall never know. But she did not need to have the full process as had been, or as is done for other saints.
Yeah.
Yay, Hildegard. That's her own fulfilling prophecy, right? That's her.
There we go. There we go.
Feather on the breath of "I told you so." But
Yeah.
our topics for the day, lest I lose track for the 15th time today in my I am Gretel following Hansel through the forest. Hildegard of Bingen is our saint. Meramael / Heramael / perhaps Seu Curador / others. My note of demon of the day. Our herb is nettle. That's the lovely American overcorrection there. Overcorrection in general, herb. But nettle, the Ortiga species. Peridot is our stone or mineral. Our type of magic, we were so bold as to just use Veriditas, the greening power that is described by Hildegard as our type of magic. So it's an extension of Hildegard's kind of realm. Puella is the figure of the day. The trump is the Hierophant, and the dead magician is a long-awaited figure and much beloved with a side eye. Many people, the notorious Sybil Leek, the most famous of witches of England.
Right, according to the BBC.
Yes. Give someone a title and it is indeed their title.
Yeah, right. There's a performative speech act, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It is said.
When
I said it.
We have just told you, as I have just said, I have just told you.
I have seen it when I did write it.
Say man and wife. Say man and wife. So, Hildegard. Hildy sound. I'm gonna say Hildy, but it sounds too informal and it creeps me out because she scares me just a little bit in the but Hildegard of Bingen. So we're talking right after the turn of the 000s. Right. So this is 11th and 12th century. Very early enough, as we discussed in our past episode, that she exists previous to the popular conception of witchcraft as a crime, as a political crime.
Right.
Because most certainly our lovely Hildegard of Bingen would have been rounded up in the heretical paddy wagon and made to answer for her amazing visions. Because so it's interesting trying not to like backtrack too much and discuss things we've already discussed, but this is the Sibyl of the Rhine. This is a German Benedictine abbess who was a writer, composer, philosopher, mystic, visionary, medical writer.
Prolific letter writer as well.
Yes, and prolific guilt tripper. and like, so flames out of the side of her head, except it was actually on the top of her head. That she maintained a tight control of the women who were under her legacy. And as such was, there's some amazing guilt trips that she went on in letters of like, you who have suckled at my tit type of, of like, you dare leave me type of thing. And also just because of her everything she got going on with her in her own ways. It's in my ideas of the church at this time, which is if you can't beat them, join them. There was no way to discredit or debunk or to cause scandal with what she was seeing and doing. That they were like, you know what, you can have an abbey, and we're just gonna use it to. There's a bit of the spiritual tourism starting to go on, where it's like, let's go see this famous, abbess or this famous monk in this time period. And the church kind of catches on to this, in my opinion, as far as what's going on, because there's a lot going on with her, right? She she is making she is writing in a time where most women are writing under anonymous.
Mm.
She is proudly writing music, creating science books, theology books, which of course there's no real differentiation in that time period. That the natural world and all of the observation of such, we're moving towards a scientia, but it is a scientia still within the purview of the church, right?
Yeah, the natural sciences, assuming that nature is also the domain of God, of course. Yeah, yeah. But she is specifically also considered by a bunch of different scholars to be a foundational point for what gets called natural scientific history as well, especially in Germany, for sure. Along with many legends of her prophesying and her healing stuff. I was also reading that by now, she's one of the most recorded composers in history. She's also not exactly unique, but she's one of the very few known composers that were doing both the lyrics and the actual music itself. Although it sounds like not as much of the music survives. Although there are more surviving chants like written down than by any other composer in the entire Middle Ages as well. So she's prolific in a number of different areas. Astounding. There's so much that we could talk about.
Absolutely. Do you want to do a brief bio sketch again? Is that helpful?
Absolutely. Yeah. I always think the biography is great as like a spine to hang things on, and then we can talk about maybe some of her specific writings. I was looking a little bit into the Physica and the Causa et Curae, the Scivias as well, and I'm excited to get into the Lingua Ignota a little bit as well, and then we got loads more time and room to also get into Viriditas as well, in terms of the juicy humoral theory of it all. But yes, so she's born circa 1098, and we're pretty sure her death date, or at least her death date, has been said to be the 17th of September for a good long time, since she passed in 1179. She is another one of these. There's how to make a saint, right? Not the outside of the canonization. How to she follows a path we've seen a little bit before. She's the youngest of many children. A lot of people say it's 10 children. Apparently, we have records for at least 7 of those older siblings, born to some minor nobility. Hildebert and his wife Mechtilde in Bermersheim, and by the time she is 8, she's kind of handed over. She's not handed over yet, but she comes under the ministrations of the person who will become her mentor, Jutta of Sponheim, and she also records in her own autobiography that from a very young age she was already experiencing visions and things, but she certainly wasn't writing them down, and it doesn't seem she was telling very many people. By 13,
that autobiography itself is the language of it is right when we're talking just the style of prose that she is enjoying, right? Barbara Newman quotes that letter, right, of her experience of the umbra viventis lucis, the reflection of the living light, where from my childhood, before my bones, nerves, and veins were fully strengthened, I have always seen this vision in my soul, even to the present time when I am more than 70 years old. In this vision, my soul, as God would have it, rises up high into the vault of heaven and into the changing sky and spreads itself out among different peoples, although they are far away from me in distant lands and places. And because I see them this way in my soul, I observe them in accord with the shifting of clouds and other created things. I do not hear them with my outward ears, nor do I perceive them by the thoughts of my own heart or by any combination of my 5 senses, but in my soul alone while my outward eyes are open. So I have never fallen prey to ecstasy in the visions, but I see them wide awake day and night. I love this passage because she describes so articulately a very, dare I say, modern conception of what a vision might be, as opposed to this kind of superstitious relay, especially after we get post-Reformation, of Catholics are hallucinating. all the time. And here, this is true mystic, right? She's giving it to us that she does not see or hear with her senses.
Right.
That it is an inner faculty, it is the inner eye, the inner ear that is truly participating in these visions. As such, they can't be contested, corroborated by anybody else. A theme in her life, and I, sorry to interrupt that way, but like, no. Because we've talked about, you have stressed the importance of seeing and vision as being to understand that the inner visionary world is not considered unreal. It is considered real, and that perhaps the dismissal through psychologization, that's a word with syllables, or through trying to shoo away the fantastical because of the Industrial Revolution and the let's all be good soldiers again for Christ and country. But there's this myth that visions are something else, and I love that in her agedness that she gives this articulate description. So yay, young age and visions, and being able to articulate them. And of course, I'm sure that her own description and her realization of what visions are like for her has been re-articulated so many times that it is, of course, a rehearsed answer, especially by the time she's penning it in as all great figures do in a "Tell me about your life." But that's so yes. Sorry to interject that.
No, not at all. No, it's a really great point. Yeah, we've even got bits and pieces of that sense of problematizing all kinds of sight, not just like inner sight. I think I've mentioned before Stuart Clark's Vanities of the Eye, but like this 17th century sense of centralizing of truth making, which has some very explicit applications in terms of the colonialism of the nascent British Empire. So just as the people on the edges going and seeing these weird things can't actually be trusted to know what they're seeing, they have to take it back to London and it has to be interpreted by experts. So too, like the very vision of an individual has to be is going to be questioned. All of these worries about optical illusions become very real. But exactly. And in the course of that, especially stuff that other people can't see is even more problematized and kind of thrown out. It's also interesting that she points out that like this isn't about like ecstasies and like throwing myself around and it's not an extroverted thing necessarily. There's always this careful sense of like she's framing herself as confessing something that also is absolutely in line with what she's met, with what can't be questioned, right? In some really interesting ways. A bunch of feminist historians have made a lot of excellent points about that as well. But yes, so she's at 13. She is actually like handed over to the Benedictine monastery in Disibodenberg, where she basically is there for an awfully large part of her life, nearly 40 years, and it's not until the age of 43 that she hears this voice commanding her to write and say the things that she's been seeing and hearing in her visions that she's that she kind of frames as having kept very, very secret until then. And from that, she doesn't just say a bunch of things and then goes back to chopping wood and drawing water or whatever. She makes all of these astounding achievements, which are even more remarkable in the fact that being a lady of any sort in the medieval monastic world, and also despite a bunch of like illness and the various attendant legal and political difficulties she faces, to become the manager of the convent at Disibodenberg when Jutta eventually dies in 1136. And she even ends up founding two other convents in Rupertsberg near Bingen and in Eibingen across the River Rhine, where we'll get to that when she dies, I guess. But that's where her relics now are. Yeah, that's most of the. I mean, obviously, there's more specifics about a well-lived life. Like she writes her own vita, her own life, but she also, soon after dying, there's a couple different biographers one of which actually dies midway through doing it because there's so many things to say about her, and it gets passed on to someone else who also doesn't necessarily fully finish it either. There's a lot, especially when we start incorporating the idea that her writing letters, which were to her mentees, to her ladies and other people that came to study with her under her, both like at the monastery and in the wider world, but also writing to popes and I think emperors and all sorts of things. If we take that as not just like, oh, this is more of the corpus of her writing, but actually like her life in the world, she's incredibly politically active and is doing all sorts of things. And as I say, so much we could get into. Were there any other like particular points of her life that you wanted to bring up?
No, I think the life. How do I say this? I don't think the life is extraordinary. It's what she did with the life, and then like this is she's a voluminous writer for the time period, and furthermore as a woman in this time period, which is unheard of generally. She's one of the great anti-anonymous. I think that's really what it is. I mean, she has these miracles and visions, but she spends so much time learning and creating. She's one of those people that I look to with. I think there's this self-evaluation that comes up for artists, especially of like we talk about consumer culture, but what is it to consume? What is it to generate? And what is our impact upon the earth that we might contribute towards, as Masonry might say, towards the common stock of knowledge. And Hildegard is so generative in what she's doing. And it's not just the copy paste of a medieval herbal or bestiary, which we know is based upon other books and stories of its time.
Right.
It's through direct observation and encoding within a coherent philosophy, an understanding of the self, so like the know thyself in the classic sense, but also like our first book is Civius, right? So this is in fact to know the ways, to know the natural ways around you in order to find and collocate yourself within them. So as regards to what's anything about her life, I think her life is there. I mean, it's there for her to in her own words, and there for us to look at very easily. It's rare that we have someone like this, to the point where not only is the canonization process kind of rushed along by Benedict, that he also names her a doctor of the church.
Like in the same year, right?
Yeah, which is, there are not that many doctors. So
no, there's like four, not many doctors, and especially not many women. There's like four, right? Like she's the fourth, with like Saint Teresa of Avila, Catherine of Siena, and Teresa of Lisieux, right?
Yes.
Yeah. That she's absolutely contributing to that stuff. She's already, having not just written some good stuff, but that stuff's already being used and understood and championed.
Yes. So so breaking it apart by works and things like that. What favorites, standouts?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the three I've looked at mostly, and again, like the more I read of her, the more I'm like, I should have been reading this a long time ago. The Physica, obviously, which is like 9 books that describe the virtues. I don't think she calls them secrets, but that becomes very common in the early modern to refer to them as that. The medicinal and what we now call scientific properties of Botanica, Mineralia, and Animalia, amongst other things. A lot of brewers get very excited that this is that it contains one of the first recorded references to the use of hops as a preservative in beer. And there's all sorts of other bits and pieces in there, and also in Causa et Cura and Causes and Cures, about like she seems to be suggesting that boiling water is best to get things out of it, and all sorts of other things that a lot of hindsight historians of science are like, she's our gal. So there's a Physica, she's been very popular since she wrote it. There's Causes and Cures, which is not just, again, a lot of great medical stuff. It's also important to understand that the way it's organized is also absolutely not just acknowledging microcosm, macrocosm, but like really elucidating it. That the first part of it is about the creation of the cosmos, and then humanity is its kind of like peak experience of itself, if you want to put it like that, and the interplay between microcosm and macrocosm, both physically and spiritually. And again, like you said, with theology and science, like they're not separated. So to talk about the material properties of things is also to understand something of how they apply spiritually, and a little bit vice versa as well. And then you already mentioned the Scivias as well, which is mostly kind of framed as being about her describing and interpreting her visions. It's 26 visionary experiences that are especially kind of captured in these illuminations of the manuscript that she kind of oversees, and they're beautiful. Along with that, like we said, one of the largest bodies of letters, like around, I think, nearly 400 to survive from the Middle Ages. She writes a morality play musical, right? The Ordo Virtutem. And she also has a bunch of stuff that she doesn't exactly keep secret. She talks about it quite openly. But I got very interested in her work. I'm not going to say the Latin of it, an unknown language brought forward by this simple human being, Hildegard, which starts talking about her lingua ignota, composed of her literae ignotae, her unknown language. We can get into that. But yes, the physica is still, in circulation, and people are still using it for a variety of very useful things in terms of herbalism and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on a lot of what there is there. That I like the major themes that are like she's very good at putting on the table what the terms that she's going to use, and then they become even more solid as her years go on, right? So if we're going to talk about things like Viriditas in more detail, but the shade of the living light, the shadow of the living light, the voice of the shadow of the living light, this concept of living light in general. Her lingua ignota is fascinating, right? It's about 1,000 nouns. Eingods and Allegans, right? The god and angel words are the first two that are there. But the characters themselves are, a lovely Tolkien-esque feel to them.
Yes, I've been, as I said before, I think we first record, I've been going through Sarah Higley's work on the unknown language, and she actually makes the express comparison, or a contrast, really, to Tolkien. She points out that, like, when a woman invents a language, antennas are raised, and goes on to talk about the scholarly men that we know who are into this pursuit. Trithemius, who's actually one of the first people to popularize at least referencing the lingua ignota, as well as John Dee, but also like Rabelais, Jonathan Swift, and Tolkien. And she talks about how Tolkien actually emphasized the intensely personal nature of creating a language. And Tolkien, I don't think, is ever explicitly framing it as a language he has derived from angels or God. But he was writing it for himself, it seems, and kind of keeping it in a closet and not really wanting to talk about it. And talks about the project in a couple essays he writes on it, about in terms of his kind of being shy about it. He's this idea of inventing a language in terms of poetic exploration, if not expression, and that it's a passion that's very private and a little obsessive and even slightly embarrassing. This kind of, I think the essay he writes on it is called a secret vice or something like that. And Higley compares it to the attitude. She says, compare this attitude to Hildegard's brazen announcement of her lingua to Pope Anastasius as proof of her right to counsel him. Amazing. I mean, Higley also talks about there is a historical lineage. No, she says there are plenty of examples of women who've also created secret languages or constructed them or received them. But she takes big, she talks about the channeled Martian language of Helene Smith, the Swiss medium, and like unrecorded imaginary language of Mary Baker in the 19th century. And then also like starts getting into, because she's already talking about Tolkien, like Ursula K. Le Guin and her various like linguistic experiments and things like that. But she takes issue with the idea that there's this like historical lineage of Hildegard creating a woman's secret language, and actually takes some issue with Barbara, where she says like, while she eloquently describes Hildegard's Christian symbolism as a theology of the feminine, wherein female imagery of the church, spirit, and creation are favored. Hildegard can't have been said to have created a linguistics of the feminine. That like it's not really a school that she sets out. It's discovered very late by the modern world. While another Spondheimian, Trithemius, like mentions it, he doesn't actually like quote any of it.
She doesn't focus on it herself, even to other people.
Yeah.
She doesn't look at the lingua ignota as something to share to her sisters that we know of, or in letter form, or to mention it outside of her kind of reception. And there are many theories behind that, and one of which is just it's not a complete language. She knows what languages are. Right. And that goes to kind of as the feminist side of it too. I think that she works very well. We talked about this in the last episode too, with like Rosa of Lima of man, I wish I had looked up the documentary, but that same documentary of like the Tibetan nuns, of like the woman saying that, you know, what is my option as a woman is to become a nun so that I can be freer than I would be if I was bound to a man raising children. And there is this thing of noble women who are not being married off or being put in monasteries and abbeys to kind of bake until they are married off, because right their chastity is more intact when they're put in the kind of egg making box that these monasteries and abbeys are. But that Hildegard, by biographers' accounts, probably learned some hint of formal Latin because of obviously it was the language of the church, and she's reading Psalms and things like this and writing in it. But there's and probably learned the basics of the faith, but was probably not instructed in like liberal arts education through the trivium and the quadrivium in the same way. And this there's a lot of talk around this, because if that's the case, it makes her all the more impressive. And
an autodidact.
A kind of evidence of the divine channeling that she was undergoing. I think it also takes away from the fact that we're dealing with an incredibly intelligent person who probably was voracious with whatever she could read. In my opinion, I can't imagine that her brain was not like, give it to me, I want to read it.
Right.
And I don't have a problem with her constructing a lot of these views, visions, and otherwise, because who of us has not had, visions of insight while reading something? It's like, that's how it works. Knowledge, the more knowledge you are exposed to, the more you can extrapolate from that. And I think it does her a disservice to say that she was not, she may have not been as educated as a man of her time period going in, but she's in the system pretty fairly early in life, 8 to 14, depending on which, account we're going by of her being with the Benedictines in full. And so I don't know if it's just helpful to kind of be able to play into the dismissing of her amazingness that way, which also plays up on it, because then of course it comes directly from God, and we have the kind of like male rule followers and the female rule breakers that are that kind of feminization that happens there. And that's definitely been looked at by this, as you brought up, and with Hildegard always has to come up, this not only feminist Christianity, but just feminist New Age in general has kind of revered Hildegard as this figure that much like as a proper cult of saints goes, I would compare her to Cyprian in that there are people who are not Christian in their framework at all, who are bending over backwards to have a practice with Hildegard. And there are other saints like that, and I think that's part of the wonderful thing about the cult of saints. However, it is with Hildegard, we do see this increasing reverence within the contemporary New Age movement as a mystic. And there's Hildegard medicine and the Hildegard network, and all these things go where it's her reputation for this natural way of living, some of which we have direct evidence now that, like, well, that was not the right thing to do. But all in all, she has a very good guideline for living and contextualizing things, of growing your own medicine and understanding the world around you as a means to being healthy, and understanding your place in the relationship with wellness in this larger sense.
Yeah.
And she's also an advocate for women to be able to go to medical schools in that time period, which is so. Is this I was deprived of things and I want to just to make sure other women have access, or is it just I like the idea of it being out and out rebellion from the beginning. Maybe that's just helpful.
No, I think that's fair. I mean, also, like, you know, her popularity with all sorts of people, and especially some of the like fully righteous corrections coming out of like feminist history, are also about how she's treated in the historiographical record, like how other historians have looked at her. Again, just like looking at how the unknown language like discussion. I misspoke earlier. Trithemius talks about her unknown letters, but he doesn't talk about the language at all. That's in Polygraphia in 1508, and it's not till like the mid to late 19th century that we get like really any serious like earnest discussion of the unknown language itself, and that's primarily by two cats, Wilhelm Grimm and Friedrich Wilhelm Emil Roth. And both of them are like disgusted that the lingua has so many in its corpus, its like list of body parts. It gets really upset about how she's naming female genitalia. Grimm says that that mentioning the parts of the body is nicht ziemlich, is it seems indelicate, right? In the mind or in the mouth of a virgin. Much less a religious one. And and the other guy is like talks about how these are utterly obscene items, and that like it doesn't befit someone to be writing about this kind of thing. This is in the 19th century, like which again is not great for those kinds of views, but like that's a good couple centuries after she's written them and people are interested in her wider work. So yeah, just worth pointing out like that the history of the history is also like deeply contested by people not wanting to admit that the women's bodies, deserve medicine and understanding.
It's like, yeah, we have not studied still to this day, 1,000 years later,
right?
Very much, but there's a lot of it. I love the inspiration that she is from everything from just the analysis of visions is heavily a thing attributed to her, right? Because we have a count of what her visions are. So her visions get hyper romanticized because there's graphic nature of the descriptions as well as illustrations from the very beginning of what these visions unfold. And just people talking about trying to explain it through migraine visions and things like this that happen. Was that man who mistook his wife for a hat? Was a book my dad made me read when I was younger.
Oh yeah.
It goes into that case histories of patients and things, and he talks about Hildegard in there as migrainous visions, and as we are both migrainous people, sure, I wish that I was as prolific and as she was.
Mine just made me throw up. If I was having awesome illustrated visions, that would be something quite different. Yeah.
There is, of course, Lingua Ignota, Kristen Hayter's musical projects, which are fantastic, right? Where else am I going to get may failure be a garment to wrap around you, may failure be a belt with which to gird you, may failure be a noose with which to hang you. That's one of the greatest, lovely modern curse songs there is in my vocabulary. But also things like there's a minor planet, 898 Hildegard, that's named for her. There's, as you said, one of the most recorded composers that there is. I remember the Zorn album, the David Lynch album with Jocelyn Montgomery. I remember in 1998. Just remember when it came out. It was my freshman year in college. Garmarna, Devendra Barnhart. There's many. The Beloved, Tilo Medic. There's just a lot of people who Azam Ali also who doesn't love her or shouldn't. Everyone should love Azam Ali. Her voice is as some have described, she's up there with Lisa Gerrard as far as just a voice that has been used in so much. But at any rate, just Hildegard herself inspires, and she inspires outside of the specifically Christian, which is fascinating.
Yeah.
This description of the living light as God, which we'll kind of revisit when we go back into Viriditas later, because it's important there. Yeah, she's fascinating. It's just beautiful. I think we could probably continue to talk about her for hours, but in the interest of a show, just fascinating. There's documentaries, there's fictitious, fictionalized accounts, both in text and in visual media. There's so much out there on this incredibly gifted and giving figure, and I think that she's a prime figure for one, because she is not a saint outright until 2012. That doesn't mean she hasn't been worked with as a saint. She's fairly new into the quote unquote traditional witchcraft register, and there's always this ruse is the wrong word. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. What do you call that?
Illusion. Illusions, Michael.
Illusion. Yes. Perhaps a willingness to engage with the inspiration, the past as inspiration, and the witch trials as inspiration, and material as inspiration with which to fit in this greater paradigm that is called traditional craft a lot, which is hopefully and ideally aware of where it has bent the past to fit an aesthetic. In my opinion, I don't think there's anything gained to be false about that. And
to fulfill certain functions as well, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
To play into the archetype of the other and the othering that goes with what which is. As not, if we're going to claim to be a non-human entity and then suddenly say that that's all female healers, which is a dangerous thing to say. And I don't think people realize how dangerous it is or why it's dangerous, which is probably a topic for another time. But it is not just as simple as saying that every, accused witch was simply a folk healer. In fact, it does a disservice to the many people who had nothing to do with it, who were just victims of the church, and jealousy and greed. However, that said, Hildegard is rife with interpretations of or a storehouse of power, much like Saint Olga. We discussed that, perhaps as Saint Olga is newer to the Western canonical world, that this is a saint that is meant for what many, and myself included, would call traditional craft. This is a figure that will let you know exactly what she thinks. The strength of the personality is intact in the archetype itself. This is she has that kind of, when we say that Cyprian has his landmarks of being an asshole spirit to deal with,
right,
but worth it for those that have found an engagement with there, and this kind of deified sainthood where they become so independent. Hildegard is up there with this as well, in my opinion. To the point where of detaching herself from Christianity through the New Age and those other things going on, but still so quintessentially her. The landmarks of Hildegard, I suppose.
Yeah.
Territorian map and copier, signifier and signify, blah, blah, blah. I suppose we can revisit anything that we feel left out of when we go into various details later, and I do think it's helpful to save to see where it pops up later.
Yes.
So by the route accustomed to us, then the next expression should be in this tour would be the demon, Heramael, Meramael, etc. And its possible corresponding Eshu through the great syncretism of the 1960s of Seu Curador, the healer Eshu healer. So I know that you have several strong thoughts, lineages of thoughts, conversations with no doubtly with Jake in the past that might inform all this. So I'm going to step aside and listen to the darts being thrown.
Well, yeah.
Meramael.
Well, from a a healer saint to a healer demon, daemon, etc. Heramael or Heramael or Herumael, or also with the herb thing you were saying. Also Eramael in Lansdowne 1202. Welcome for 669 has Cramael as well, which perhaps seems a H written badly. Hermel, a couple of others. One of the spirits listed in the texts that we'll call the Verum family, specifically in the second line of the deputy Satanachia, they found the four. I call them the professors, with Sergathy, Trimasael, and Sestugriel. And Heramael's primary offices, purviews, if we like, are pretty consistently about teaching the art of healing. So Jake's True Grimoire gives the officers teaches the art of healing, including the complete knowledge of any illness and its cure. He also makes known the virtues of plants, where they are to be found, when to pluck them, and their making into a complete cure, which has a technical term. It's why Culpepper's is the complete English physician sometimes. That's pretty consistent. We don't always get that in the different iterations of Verum and its predecessors, but the older Verum manuscripts have teaching the art of medicine as opposed to healing, but gives knowledge of all diseases with their entire radical cures, the roots of their cures. Makes known all types of plants, the places where they are to be found, and when they must be collected. Again, gathering is a significant part of their preparation. The timings, the places are all part of the gathering at their height of the virtue to which you are putting them into effect. Also their true compositions as well, so not just simpling herbs, but also how you can combine them to do things for effecting a perfect cure. And that's, as I say, that's pretty consistent across them. And again, the second line of Satanachia, the professors all have a sense of teaching something about magic itself. They give familiars. Trimasael's very engaged in alchemy, specifically in the making of various powders, and also the timings of things. So they're part of a set that are very much into not just doing magic for you, but teaching you magic, tutelary daemon stuff. In terms of like et al, is when we get into a bunch of stuff that Jake got into in Pandemonium, and also in some of the chats I was lucky enough to have with him. The main one is that via the German Honorian, Meramael is identified as Buer of the can we say more popular? Yeah, I guess we'd say more popular. The Goetia of Solomon, the 72. Buer also turns up in the Grand Grimoire and various other Bibliothèque Blue stuff. Also, it seems that by Meramael or General being rendered from a H to a G, we also have Gemma and Gemen from the Livre des Spirits, the 15th century French Book of Spirits. In the list their Gemen, in the catalogue their Gemma. Again, not all of these changes in spelling are because it's a different spirit or because the copyist wasn't paying attention. There's also not a standardization of spelling. But yeah, we have two other spirits who are also primarily concerned with medicine and herbalism. Gemma is the older one. In the Livre des Spirits is said to be a great king whose office is to teach the virtue of herbs and all sciences and cure those who are sick when one commands him. It can also make people sick, as is often the case with with demons. And there's less written about Gemma and Gemen. Jake definitely postulated that like there might be he might be turning up in the Book of the Officers of the Spirits, which we can find was printed as the Book of Oberon. But Buer from the Goetia of Solomon has a bit more to get into, and certainly in the work I've done, or from personal observation and experiment, there's a pretty tight, they answer to each other's sigils if they are separate entities. There's certainly a merger going on. So Buer is said to be a great president, and his shape is a whole thing that we can get into as well. So again, the Duplancy image of the lion-headed cartwheel of legs comes from a pretty clear set of I think we can call them misreadings. I mean, again, if enough people have seen that image and are going to call that spirit like that, who's to say it's not going to turn up like that? But we can pretty much categorically nail it down to a couple particular transmissions, shall we say, which is that he's said to be in Scott's discovery, he's a great president and is seen in this sign, and then there's brackets and an asterisk, and this is taken to mean he turns up looking like a star, hence all the legs in a cartwheel shape. The Latin, this is from Weyer. The Latin is seen in the signo, which is pretty clearly image or form. But this is taken later to mean the zodiacal sign. So by the time Buer crops up in many later English Goetias of Solomon, it's talking about how he turns up in the sign of Sagittarius when the sun is in Sagittarius, so giving a very specific timing to when to work with him. And this is found as well with like the form of an archer. Several of the spirits called goetic or found in books of magic that are goetic or can be usefully called that are also said, or also sometimes interpreted rather than the form of an archer as the sign of Sagittarius. And again, Weyer's asterisk represents a blank in the text. Where the description is missing. Like he was going to fill that in later and never got round to it, maybe, or couldn't find the reference. We've all been there. But again, anything that gets attached to these demons and how they love to promulgate themselves in print eventually finds its way into someone's canon. So again, I think this is fascinating in terms of like looking at it both as a historian and a practitioner, and giving space for these spirits to express themselves in new and sarcastic ways. I think probably a fair way of putting it. So Buer also doesn't just teach; he absolutely teacheth philosophy, moral and natural, and also logic. So we do get some of the trivium and the quadrium in there. The virtues of herbs specifically. He gives the best familiars. He can heal all diseases, especially of men. And here he rules over 50 legions rather than 40 in earlier texts. And so Buer also turns up, as I say, in the Grand Grimoire, in the first of three spirits under Agliarep, the first minister of Beelzebub, which also gives us, if we're going to do a direct comparison, could be an overlay on another Verum spirit. I don't think that's as helpful. That's a lot more speculative than, again, resort to the German Honorian, where it literally says, this spirit, who is also called this thing. Again, there's a difference between like laying one map over the other, or one set of hierarchies or sequence in a spirit list over the other and being like, they must be equivalent, and actually seeing how these spirits, turn up and work with each other. There are other confusions as well with Meramael. Welcome 983 lists a sigil for them that is attributed. There seems to be a shift around, shall we say, from one of the many sigils that are given to Hale, who as a spirit of letters and characters, unsurprisingly, has like lots of different sigils. And it's the one that looks a bit like a double-sided pen with a circle in the middle. And later that becomes like a one-sided pen, or a pen, if you will. So yeah, there's a bunch of ways that they crop up, and I think it's that like there are plenty of spirits that teach the virtues of herbs just as a thing they also do. But I think it certainly seems in Meramael's case that because they don't have lists of like 12 different things that they do in the Verum family, they're a lot more specific. by the time we get to the 17th century, Le Megaton, they're doing all sorts of things. And there's a wider sense of the popularization of the practice via what gets called the clerical underground, has this notion that like they were partly very popular with students and with clerical students at that, and how many monasteries were like hiding grimoires and things like that. So the idea that like you would go to a demon to help pass your exams as a version of like smart drugs, or a version of like the familiar spirit as giving you the answers in the test and things like that. So it makes sense that they would all deal with herbs and stones, and again the things that Hildegard talks about in Physica, the things that will get called secrets, which is also partly from the way that French in the early modern period, just like we frame operation as experiment, secret is another term for a spell as well, like an actual operation to a specific end. But the emphasis on like not just knowing what herbs do or being able to empower herbs, even, that I think we've talked about a little bit, but like specifically for medicine. And again, Verum has another spirit that also deals with disease, both curing and causing, Guland, but it's Heramael that's really like the herbalist of the gang. And I mean, I could bang on, but like in personal experience, I found them particularly fond of a couple different plants. Is that because like that's what that spirit and I work with best? Is that because that expressed something of their character or how they like to be? In my case, it's been primarily through dandelion, working with dandelions, and then attendant stuff about like a lot of alchemical innuendos and kind of reference material on the green lion as well. But this sense of like, I guess maybe combining some of that Duplancy lion head with this very, very green spirit, and a spirit of various different ways of greening as well, which, pleasant enough, leads you on a lot of merry adventures, not just to get the herb you need, but also to show you a bunch of other things. Less turning up and telling dick jokes, but certainly like very interested in like fertility stuff and also the weird things around human health and hygiene and that kind of stuff. Spirit I've very much enjoyed and grateful for working with.
Yeah, it's fascinating. The overlap with Buer is new for me. It's lovely to stretch, and in full disclosure, dear reader, my Solomonic demonic days are a thing of the late 90s and early 2000s, so they are older than much of our audience, perhaps. Thus, my memory of such is like another distant world, and there's times where the different constrictions of binding, whether it is in the Enochian or Latin, still pour through my brain. But it's interesting with this spirit specifically because of the infiltration, insertion, blurring with / just wonderfully generative complication that is the syncretism with the Grimorium Verum by Fontenelle. To see that relationship of, to interject here, to let the ADHD go take over. There's that quote from I want to say it's Dion Fortune originally of, a true initiate can serve at any altar, and that one of the, I believe, missions from the adepts of the Golden Dawn is to treat every interaction as if it with the world as if it is speaking with God. And I like to think that my Quimbanda is heavily served by looking at all the things that I'm repulsed by, or just curious by, of like, why is this here? I'm not actually repulsed by the Grimorium Verum's inclusion, but that's also just because I love demonization as a form of fuck you to the establishment. Right. Especially with something like Grimorium Verum, which is, these spirits are far from wicked most of the time. Right. In my limited experience. However, Meramael, kind of like Musafine, there's a few things that come up that's interesting here because the structure is such as it is. The flow of forza or ashe can be explained in some way to mimic the hierarchy so that it makes sense in my brain as a practitioner, as a scholar, as a practitioner scholar, that the dingleberries that are curador and doceiro, specifically in that sense, right? Of you have curador is at the end of the lines under, or specifically Heramael is at the end of the lines under hail that you mentioned, right? Being this figure that is there, as well as by the time we get to aglasis or doceiro, in the Quimbandic vision is under Sergalath or Caveira. And there are some strange, it'd be very interesting to see, because there are some demons that are just given names, like we know Daemon, Tharathemus, and Nelbiroth, I believe it becomes this thing of like, why is this suddenly added on here to make it even? That Hale has the same number of legions as Sergalath underneath serving under him.
Right.
But there is still the dingleberry, the hanging chads that are Heramael and Aglasis. And what I mean by that, those of you that have just waded through the mire of my extended verbal stutter, is that it is said that Curador reports directly to Meia-Noite, that Doceiro reports directly to Caveira. That yes, in the preservation of this weird kind of lines of the left, this kind of inversion of the Umbanda lines and the rule of Umbanda that was suggested by Fontenelle here, that in a world thus far, Meia-Noite commands Mirim commands Pimenta, Pimenta commands Malay commands Sete Montañas, Sete Montañas commands Ganga commands Camino Loa commands Quirombo, who can talk to Curador, but Curador doesn't need to go to Quirombo, who goes to Camino Loa, who goes to Ganga, who does it. It doesn't have to come up in line.
Right, these spirits aren't free floating and independent of any sense of connection to other spirits or what we might call hierarchy, but they have a more direct relationship with one of their supervisors than being like next in line to on a stepped pyramid thing. Yeah.
Like they're not in the phone tree. They already know.
Right, they got a direct line.
Yeah, and so there's something I find that interesting, and there's these ways, and I've talked with many people over the years of just like this relationship between Curador and Meia-Noite there is something very strongly suggested between the two. And I like to think of if Meia-Noite is that, even in the reliance of the syncretism with hail, but this darkness, that which eclipses the darkness of death, if Meia-Noite and Caveira are the hands of Omulu, as in expression, the darkness and the physical remains, that hail has some relationship to what happens when we shut our eyes, even in the brief moments of the eclipsing of our living, until the great eclipse itself takes us to, and we become spirit at death. The Curador is also related to the tie-in of the Kalunga being the forest, as well as the ocean, as well as the cemetery. And this depth of pulling things up from the ancestral world at nighttime, where the trees breathe differently, and the soul parts, when we bring in indigenous and African cosmology coming in, of just the tree has both time and place, and as well as just life force, and that life force, when taken in wrong ways, can create a miasma, and that this is Curador's domain. This is the thing that the plants that can kill can also cure, whether it's just by a Paracelsian dosage, or outright knowledge of plants as the kind of split of knowledge between affecting health versus inviting death, which both adversely, one either helpfully affects health or detrimentally affects health. So it's towards an affect theory of death using plants. All mushrooms are edible, some only once. This notion with Curador, that he gives a hint that he might be more plant than human, that as an issue that he is tied to the memory of those priests of specifically the Orisha, the Nkisi, the Fodu, that are like Osain or Gatenji or Minipanzu, that are the plant guardians, the magicians of the forest, those spirits that stay in the forest. They are found there. They are not found in the urban environment the same way. They are not found in the garden the same way, although they are there in some form where there is, dare I say, viriditas, which penetrates all creation, right, according to Hildegard. And there's a lot of inflation going on here, and it makes me sound crazy, and that's awesome. But Curador as a spirit is said to come in a very kind of preto velho, old African man, Africa descendant, smoking a pipe, dressed in white and red, and that there is his extreme knowledge of cures and poisons, even to the point of folk use, where I could make you eat this, but wearing this plant underneath your head kerchief and wearing it close to the crown of your head will affect you in that way. Like understanding the methodologies or the cosmologies of all of the African inherited indigenous influence ways within Brazil. Curador is put into this point. It is an issue that is talked about as if no one knows who the true one is except the person who's talking about it, which is not uncommon. But because he's a rarer, quote unquote, issue, it's an issue that we have both seen in possession. And he's not without humor, but he also can turn on a point. His relationship to the kind of Datura family is always noted, as well as to the Ortiga family, to nettle, which is not surprising that we group nettle in as the plant for today. Yeah. And I've had multiple elders tell me, if you understand Ortiga, you'll understand Curador. And part of that is knowing how to handle him, right? Like the nettle leaf, the syringes that are always there, but if you dry them out, the syringes go away. If you boil it, it goes away. If you know how to pick the leaf carefully, the stinging won't happen. But should it happen, it will also go away. It is a stinging that you can bear. Yeah. So to me, this is what happens when there's not a spoonful of sugar with each, medicine. That the plants, herbal medicine tastes bad. It's difficult to swallow, and it's amazing, but it's one of the things that I remember even in the herbal mentorships they have done, that convincing people that like they've got to swallow this in mass, like 4 cups of this like twice a day, it's very difficult compared to like just take this pill once a day. Right. Like we have evolved in many ways, and sometimes there's more of a nostalgia towards this kind of natural world, a way of doing things. But so many of our medicines do come from the observation and unfortunate commercialization of the natural world. I would say that Curador is, again, not only just the awareness of the plant world, of the greening world, of that combo-infused greening, or ayahuasca-guided greening, but he is himself a plant of that nature. And I think I wrote an article long ago at this point for VGS, I think it was my first year, talking about Quimbanda and plants. But like, there comes a point where when you work with plants, you start to treat each plant like its own spirit, and that doesn't happen right away, and that evolves too. But that every occurrence of the plant becomes a manifestation of that plant's spirit. And in Quimbanda, to even treat it like it's an Eshu or what offerings do I need to give it to best harness you, to work with you in that way. And I think Curador is behind that. That if he's the one that's close to Osain, to Katende, to these herbalism deities, this is the tradition of the benzedeira, the curandeiro, that's there. So fascinating, amazing, lovely spirit. Then is a memory too that Quimbanda is not just devils in the classic sense of this 40s romanticization of like caked anti-superheroes come down and have fantastic underwear,
right? But and swirl their capes, yeah.
Yeah, that there are a whole class of spirits within Quimbanda, many, many different types of spirits, but in this case, a whole class that would be noted for being Preto Velho like in most of their time Jabal on on this earth as the devil when they're down, or how they work. It's not always it's not always like quintessential like villainous devil in the corner like pawing his hands. Sometimes while there's a good deal of laughter, I just think that there is also there's so much weird wisdom that he wants you to prove that you're worthy of and make sure that you are incorporating it. He doesn't like repeating himself. He doesn't like in this way. But anyway, there's a lot there. There's a lot to be said about him, and probably too much at the same time. It has already been said.
Yeah. I think definitely that sense of a way of approaching spirits, especially rooted in your landscape, right? Is something I've taken from looking at and practicing Quimbanda, not just as a set of rules, but a methodology and an approach to work and oneself and one's relationships.
It's an interesting side of it in talking with a couple elders about this recently. When you are new to a tradition, you owe it to kind of vacate your own self in order to learn that tradition, right? Like you have to be able to find the landmarks and be able to transmit and to understand, have the transmission happen in a way that is recognizably that tradition. But there also comes a point where in your own practice, you will become heretical to the ones that are, sacrosanctly only following that one way of doing things. That the practice as it becomes your own will necessitate that it adapt and change. And Quimbanda is a primary one that it must come through the land that you are on. It must. So, this is, the joke amongst people that like, as Quimbanda expands into the United States, into the world, that there will be fusions, that there will be new eshus and pombagiras that reflect this kind of, as we've discussed many times, the value centers of the culture that it's going into. Yeah. And so plants themselves adapt to our use of plants are as you go into from a very warm tropical biodiverse region of Brazil to the northern latitudes of upstate or Hudson Valley, New York, beyond, and going to just Quimanderos in Scandinavia and northern Russia and things like. Your plant life changes, so therefore the quality of the eshu changes as well. Like it changes everything. Yeah. And practice has to reflect that. And we see that within mainstream religions, but it's interesting in the occult because there's this so much transmission from teacher to student. There's this emphasis on trying to keep it, but there's also there comes a point where the left hand of authorship comes in, or ownership comes in too, and we start to author our own path. Or like has been said too, I think famously, like there are two types of reglement in voodoo, right? There's yours, your house's way of doing things, and then eventually your way of doing things. And that the second one comes from learning the first one so well. Yeah. Comes from being able to use the vocabulary of tradition and knowing how to serve at that altar in a way that serves your own practice. Without being vulturey, I suppose. Right. Ultimately, right? That's the goal. How do you give back? How do you engage in a conversation and a relationality with all these things? I think Curador is a very good one for that. Or you'll poison yourself. What's in the box?
¿Por qué no todos?
Yeah. So that's Curador. Let's say rapidly turn into just babbling about him more. Nettle is obviously an easy way to transgress there. Not only because we usually do plants next, but I do think Curador is intrinsically tied, and Eshu in general is tied to heavily to this plant we call nettle, or the ortiga species in Portuguese, or ortiga, ortica,
Yeah.
in Latin. But
Yeah.
want to regale me with some nettle findings?
Absolutely do. Yeah, that sense of like not just Curador, but like the nettle mysteries help us understand Eshu and Eshus in general. Like I couldn't help but think of that when I came across like Culpeper. He often says about more common plants, like you find it growing everywhere. I'm not going to bother describing it. He says nettles are so well known that they need no description. They may be found by feeling in the darkest night. Which is like, I don't know, go out and get stung. That's nettle.
Wow.
Of which,
especially when you're like, tossing your kid into the out to Lupa in the forest, everything. You're like, you're gonna survive it. You're gonna hate it, but you're gonna survive it.
And what did we learn? Yeah. That will be an excellent lesson, like swords to children. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, there's a bunch of different nettles that get treated in the early modern English herbals I'm familiar with. Dead nettle's popular, thing called Roman nettle, wild nettle, red nettle as well, and a lot of 16th century stuff. So Culpeper has a bunch of things to say about it that we can get into. I'm struck by how martial it is. It's not to say it's its only thing going on, but its stings are likened to fire. So you got like John Parkinson in his like, oh my God, 1700 pages of his Theatrum Botanicum, saying it stings the skin most cruelly if it be touched therewith, and raise it full of blisters as if it were burnt by fire. And so one of the primary things you can do with it is learn to use fire and understand the giving and taking of fire in the body. So Parkinson says you can use the juice or the distilled water to assuage hot and swelling imposthumes, as well as burnings and scaldings by fire or water, as well as inflammation in general, which is a very martial thing to do. Gerard lists stinging nettle as an antidote for pretty much all poisons. Culpeper gives it for an antidote to the venomous stings from animals. Also, against infections of various sorts. Can be an antiseptic for wounds and skin infections. A lot of stuff about like it treating things that raise welts or itches, which are also regarded as like as very martial things. Oh my gosh, Langham's Garden of Health has like 121 entries on nettle. I kind of went through some of the ones that were more obviously demonstrative of some of its like humoral effects, again being fiery and martial. He says if you take Roman nettle and mix it with honey and then drink it with sweet wine, it causeth lust, which again is a faculty of like the blood rising to particular or descending to particular organs. Also good for nosebleeds, like a very particular instance of blood staunching, which is obviously a huge folk healing thing. That you can stamp it and apply it to the nose and forehead, or you can rub it to the temples and it'll stop bleeding. Although we know that if you put it up the nose, it's going to cause bleeding. There are other ways that it gets used, which also feel pretty martial. Langham says that you can take the seeds of red nettle, specifically gathered between St. Mary's days, and that it may serve poor men instead of pepper, and it is as good as pepper. More explicitly humoral, he talks about how you can rub the body with nettle to assuage melancholy. He doesn't make clear if you've already like boiled it or anything. It just seems like that's you
that's a little bit like when to fight a fever you can either warm or cool, right?
Yeah.
So like to put your agitation and sensorium so far over the edge that you force reset.
Yeah.
Of like like I'm so sad. You know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna go get stung.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to be sad and stung. And then it will reset me.
Yeah. My outsides will match my insides. Yeah. I mean, like wider ertification, right? All sorts of stuff about the Romans lashing themselves with handfuls of nettle as either an aphrodisiac or other kinds of like more like therapeutic regimens. Also good against phlegmatic conditions, because it's hot and and dry. For stomach phlegm, Langham gives seething a bunch of nettle in running water and butter till it be tender and then eating it. He also has a bunch of stuff around using it for diagnostic stuff, specifically around pregnancy and testing if a woman be a maiden. He says you can cast sick man's water, urine, on a red nettle, and he specifies you should do that when it's still warm. And if the nettle dies by the next morning, so will the patient. But if not, he'll live. And he also says that conception is known if you give a woman the juice of the red nettles, and if she throws it up, she is, quote, corrupted by man, and if she keep it down, she is a maid. He also says you can test for virginity by getting a woman to piss on green nettles, and if they die, then she's had sex. And he even gives some remedies for being nettled as well. He says you should anoint the place with the oil of roses or of olives, which that's one of the earliest pieces of practical herb stuff I was told by my folks, which was, if you get stung by nettles, you find burdock, which is often growing nearby, and you kind of crush it up and spit into it and make a kind of like makeshift poultice of sorts and rub that on it, which at the very least, like when you're a kid, distracts you from feeling stung. And again, it goes away anyway.
Plantain Mayor is generally said to do the same thing, right, for bee stings and like stinging things in general. Plantain does relieve some of the topical stinging effect. I don't know that about burdock though, so now I'm got plenty of burdock here too, so I'll try it sometime. Nettle is it's an amazing nutritive too. Like it's one of the plants that if you have to pick a plant to survive on for extended periods of time by only eating that, nettle is one of them. It will turn your flesh green gray, as in the documented case of the Tibetan Saint Milarepa, who I hope to talk about as a dead magician sometime. But that after he killed a whole bunch of people, and became devoted himself to the Dharma, he ate nettle for a number of years, and it turned his skin gray-green. But it has a high iron content. Its nutritive qualities are very high. Right. So it is a poor man's food, especially if you're going to be very specific about it. Nettle and let's say phase 3 and 4 of its life can be a little toxic to your kidneys in high doses, but phase 1 and 2 of its life, of each branch coming up, little tender green shoots are very popular in cuisine. And by phase 2 have a lot of nutrients. Nettle also is one of those things that has several, I'm going to use the term flush, just like it's a mushroom, but several crops of itself during a growing season. So if you cut it down, it will continue to grow just fine. It makes an amazing tincture towards hay fever, towards joint pain. It's interesting because it's used both topically through whipping, right, which brings increased blood flow to the skin and to the joints. So that's been used to ease joint pain, much like capsaicin, chili pepper basically is used to rub on and kind of allowing that heat to help, like icy hot on something sore. But taken internally as well, it helps control swelling. As well, it also lowers blood pressure because it's a vasodilator. So if you have high blood pressure, it will help bring it back down by expanding the blood vessels, which it does on the surface of the skin anyway through its stinging. So there's a lot of studies that are still being done with nettle. But as far as things go, with the exception of high dose tincture taking, it's not a plant that if you were eating it that you could take so much that it would hurt you. It's only if you were taking it in large amounts that there would be some issues with your kidneys down the road if you don't know when to harvest it. Right. Which is true of most things, right? Some things are past their date. That's what did I see somebody saying that the difference between rotting meat and hamburger, you have to know when it crosses over. That's people get, oh my God, did you know this plant does this or this thing does this? Well, if you don't know when to harvest it or how to work with it, then yes, it can in fact be bad.
Right. Timing is not just about getting your astro credentials in line. It's also literally about when the thing is there and when what's going on with it when it does that. Plants aren't just either a seed or they're not a binary of just seed or plant. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on in their life cycle.
Yes.
It just seems especially beloved by herbalists as well.
Yeah, I think it's a good metaphor for herbalism in general, following the dosage makes cure
Mm.
kind of idea. There's a lot there, I think, with just the treating the a plant that fights back is always kind of that we bred into Americans, a yay underdog. But it's funny for people who will go walking in the woods back here, like, oh my god, I'm stung by something. It's like, that's just nettle. Remember, it's everywhere here. Looks like you can everywhere on this property you can find it within eyesight.
Mm-hmm.
But it's an interesting. There's a lot going here, right? We do see it in the Saxon nine herbs charm, alongside mugwort. So Wurgulu, it's there. That's from the Lachnuga, the 10th century text. You see it in baking nettles with sugar in Jean Girard's herbal, where it boosts the vital spirits. So it's a tonic, right? It strengthens you, and it's really, he's adding sugar because, man, it's a lot. It can be a lot to just eat this. It's a strong spin. It tastes green.
Yeah,
it tastes green. Like that's the
metallic green. Yeah. It's also, sugar is also added to things at that point because yes, it's available, but also honey is itself, like you look at like John Archer's like Every Man His Doctor, honey is regarded as itself like very hot. And so you don't want to add that to something that's already doing a heating thing in case you overheat. And so sugar is seen as a better way of meaning that you can like take it in without gagging, but also that the medicine isn't overcooked in the concoction by the body of turning it into healing.
Yes. There's a lot of folk charms with like pulling the nettle plant fully out of the ground, so that you see the roots. And this is kind of a transference where you would name the sick person and their family, especially if they have fever or something like this. So you're pulling the fever out of the ground because you're pulling this nettle out of the ground. Various folk traditions would have that has to be served to the people, and other people that's like anathema. Like you wouldn't serve the thing you just could, projected the person's health onto by
right. You go and bury it, or you see a lot of like burning nettle as well.
Burning nettle or giving to living water, that type of thing. Not to stagnant water ever. To cure dropsy, a bunch of nettles growing in a graveyard was plucked and boiled in water. Then they're giving the resulting water to drink. There's a lot of talk of drinking nettle water, so making a tisane from it, including like running your hair comb through it in order to get fuller hair. So you put rosemary in the hair, but you would dip the comb into nettle in order to put that nettle tincture, that nettle juice into your scalp and into your hair.
Right, because Mars is hairy.
Yeah. So I love the Aries thing. And plus the high iron content does seem to do something too. But yeah, there's nettle in general is a first responder when the land is bad. Like it grows back and helps kind of maintain weird soil contents, to transform weird soil contents, I should say, to bring health to a land. So it kind of wanders around and volunteers where it's needed, which is why a lot of people just let it grow, let it do its thing. It's there's associations with burial grounds, and just because of, again, the transformation of dead matter in that way is there. So it is used for protection because of this, because of its ability to mitigate areas, mitigate energy from one thing to another. It is sometimes associated with otherworldly realms, whether you're going from like a Norse 9 models or like just Christian underworld hell, burning flames of hell, that nettle can cause act as a bridge between those people who especially are in purgatory, according to some lore. The outer layers of hell, that like, should you be urticized, should you pray, and like there's a very Spanish like idea of like praying with nettle while your hand, rubbing it all over your hands so that your hands are burning, so that your face is burning, so that you can experience a little bit of that kind of heat of the flames, as it were. And that is when you do, because there's actually quite some beautiful, and it's something we should talk about sometime, the kind of purgatory visionary manuals of the 19th century, and even into the 20th century, like whole societies meeting once a week to visualize going to purgatory and like taking dead people by the hands and like praying with them.
Yeah.
But there's this older tradition as well of using nettle for that and like rolling around in nettle and praying in nettle, and making rosary knots with nettle so that you can sanctify the experience and therefore go into the world of limbo. Of the outer realms, which is also interesting because we know that the outer realms of purgatory are also tied to fairy. So there's this whole thing of the shift there of like, what is it like to shift to go into the green? There's a lot of lore there, I think, that's quite beautiful.
Yeah.
But nettle is very difficult to over harvest. It will come back, but still leave some of it. But otherwise, just fucking awesome plant. Nettle rocks. Very identifiable, like you said, just fucking love it. It's kind of like how Colt's foot was the premier like early modern symbol leaf because it's so distinct of like an herbalist's lot, that shape of the Colt's foot. That nettle is arguably one of the like easy to recognize leaf silhouettes, because of its little dented teeth on the side. Good child of Mars that it is.
Yeah. That like, all sorts of like the idea of like vigorous healing again, right? And links to being protective and having courage again. And like quite tangibly being able to fortify certain borders by it not being so easy to wade through it.
Yeah. It's interesting with this emphasis on the greening, because it's still like Viriditas is right there. It's right there. It's right there. But also like Peridot, which is interesting that we haven't done before. I'm always surprised there's things that have lasted that we haven't done. Like I know we're gonna have to switch topics or like go into like what is rose quartz bought on a Tuesday at noon. But Peridot is interesting. Peridot. Because yes, of course it's chrysolite as it's sometimes known, but it's one of the few gems that research tells me here that is only available in the color that it is. Like quartz comes in many varieties and we call it by different names.
Right.
Whereas peridot is always going to be that light, vibrant kind of just light yellowish green.
Yeah.
Very verdant, like not an old plant. This is new growth, spreading out into the world. But where was there anything that stuck out other than like, okay, we can talk the science of peridot, like it's the birthstone for August. That's not science, but like the general stuff that's there. But that it might come from Latin, its name, paterol, which is like a type of opal. Or feridot, which means gemstones in Arabic. So there's lots of variants and things here, but it is always this yellow to yellow green or olive green or even lime green color. That is it's a transparent variety of olivine. And other than that, it's noted. It's very much noted in English as well. That especially amongst inheritances. But anything stand out as far as folklore that you have found for yourself?
Yeah. So like again, the green things we've looked at often seem to have a connection to eyesight, and the idea of making the world brighter and our perceptions of it clearer. We get that. There are a bunch of, as you raised with chrysolite, there's a bunch of stuff to wade through because there's a shift that happens in the Middle Ages between what gets called what, which is worth getting into because there's some overlap between chrysolite and chrysolithos and chrysolitos and chrysolitos, which are not necessarily interchangeable at various points. So Albertus Magnus's chrysolitis appears to be actual chrysolite, a pale green variety of olivine. And but it's very pale green. It's far more yellow than green. And then you've got chrysolite, what we call chrysolite itself, which after all means golden stone. But because Isidore of Seville likens chrysolithos' color to the sea, all subsequent writers end up calling it green. And even if it's an olivine that's not dark, but darker green, then it's peridot. Like you say, like it's known by its color. Add into that the fact that like topaz at various points seems to be used to mean one of those, if not both of them. Essentially what you get is Big Al saying that it's a pale, bright green color that in direct sunlight sparkles like a golden star. So he's trying to like have it both ways. It's used for, he says, eases breathing, and can given to those who suffer from asthma. There's a repeated bit of lore that seems to cross over with what we now call the golden chrysolite, which is that if you pierce the stone and either hang the stone on the bristle of a donkey or an ass, or just simply put one through it, yes. And especially if it's bound on the left wrist, which you see again and again with peridot, that it's said to drive away. Albert says it drives away terrors and melancholy. Others say it drives away demons. And there's this crossover with phantoms, not just as another word for ghost, but as I think we talked about this a little bit, a false spirit. That true spirits can make you see, like real spirits can make you see things that aren't there, as well as being themselves more present to the eyes of the soul. Right. That's again why we have all these conjurations about make sure the spirit turns up and it doesn't pretend to be anything, and it doesn't send me any false phantoms to confuse me or frighten me or what have you. So we see that repeated a lot. Again, if it's worn in a gold setting, which becomes very standard for peridot, it's also said to drive away phantoms. The other things it can do are expel stupidity and confer wisdom. And the other big things about its greening is that it gives, there's a lot of sense of like emotional health, specifically around, it feels like they're playing on green with envy. It's often said that it removes the strong passions and banishes like avarice or jealousy. And I think in some cases actually specifically mentions envy as well. That it gladdens the heart. It renders you assiduous in good works. At certain points it's said that you should only really use it if you are in good standing and in good judgment and not in mortal sin. There's also a fun link with Albertus talking about prasius, which comes from the Greek meaning leek green. So leeks coming in early, having already talked about the Sibyl of the Rhine as well. Again, he says it benefits the sight. And he says it's like a midway point between jasper and emerald, that it has some of the properties of both of them. He also says it's a palace and matrix of emerald, which comes from Theophrastus's on stones and popularized by Pliny, which is that like emeralds sometimes grow in these jasper deposits that sometimes also have this prasius that might also be considered a kind of peridot. Under its name itself, it is known. But say like the Peterborough Lapidary literally just says peridot is a stone that is light green. That is like all it says about it. There's no virtues. Like that's it. But then it later talks about chrysolite as greatly resembling seawater, casts a beam like gold on every side. So it is a light green, but it like gives a kind of golden hue as well. And it's Peterborough Lapidary that talks about being of good judgment, that you may enter and not of mortal sin, that you gives grace. You may enter into many courts and countries without any gainsaying. So this sense of like envy also absolutely crosses over into evil eye stuff. That all men will bear grace to those that carry it. It should be borne on the left side. It'll keep your body truly. Again, he lists the piercing and stringing it on a donkey bristle. Means you can go more amongst devils and have them by night without any doubt. Just like Albertus says of the chrysolite, that you can put a donkey hair through it and it gives virtues to drive away demons. Peterborough Lapidary also says that considers it the sixth stone in the breastplate of Aaron, although also admits to this like confusion between stones by saying that Isidore gives another chrysolite, which it considers the actual gold one. So there's a bunch of stuff around that in the kind of like lapidaries themselves. But this sense of like of green with some like gold, and therefore like the kind of yellows and ambers and things around that, a sense of like emotional well-being, as well as like growing well, of not being the victim of bad thoughts or the demons that, or the spirits that cause them. And then I did end up looking a little bit at some of the more modern magical and spiritual stuff about it. Again, this the homogenized in ancient times, say for instance in Judy Hall's Crystal Bible, where it was where she has this appeal to the homogenized wisdom of the ancients to keep away evil spirits, and also specifically talks about it being used psychologically to alleviate jealousy, resentment, spite, and anger, as well as reduce stress. And then Cunningham is like, this is the Venus one, even though it has this connection to the sun, partly through the other chrysolite, but also because the sun has some green to it. Again, because it makes green things grow, as well as the blood of the sun that we've talked about a little bit with like bloodstone and a couple other stones. So Cunningham talks about it in terms of being used to attract wealth. Because he says because it's green. He links it to the trump of the empress, and thus talks about like fertility and creativity and abundance and growth and the feminine. He gives it, it says even though it's regarded as solar, he thinks about it as more Venusian, as earthy, reiterates that thing about it often being put in gold, talks about protection and health and wealth and even sleep. He then also talks about, again, how the ancients say it guarded against enchantment, as well as night terrors and illusions and the evil eye, which again frames as envy and unconscious psychic attack. Says that the cups were made out of it for medicinal liquids. Specifies it can be used for healing of insect bites, and also liver ailments. Attracts love, calms anger, soothes nervousness, dispels negative emotions, calming to the nervous system, and so good for sleep. He references Roman rings worn to relieve depression as well. And so this consistent greening that doesn't make us see more clearly, it makes us feel more clearly as well. Seems something
to have this kind of general restorative, right? It's bringing back to an equilibrium through the greening nature, the kind of blood of the sun or tears of the sun, as you've been talking about.
Yeah. And the green is a remedy for the black is I think really interesting, and that's certainly as anecdotally that's been very helpful for me in some black periods. That was mostly what I got of it, but I like the idea that like the connection to leeks goes back a very long way in the Greek.
The only bits of folklore that I found was like that there's, because its connection to meteorite and to metamorphic rock.
There
are specific cultural mythologies around both. Like Peridot washes up on the Big Island in Hawaii, and is said to be the tears of Pele. As just this reified thing connected to sun deities around the world, especially if that's a nature deity or a god that produces or is in part of nature's fecundity. This greening power. So it really is, I think I picked it because it was green, but it is really kind of everything in the research of it does stand out for it to be kind of the stone of Viriditas in that way. Is really what is being called to mind here, that it restores vision to a place both internally and externally, to a place where you can see true. It restores the quality of the humors to a place where there is a balance. It restores just general health back to a place where there is balance across the board, and invoking the sun for that sense of health and balance. But it is not the burnt nature of the sun. It is that which drives growing things, that force. What is it? I'll remember that quote in a little bit. But the greening force that is there. And that it's like you say, like we've been saying, and kind of quoting our friend Phoebe about Viriditas being about being juicy and the like spiritual qualities of juiciness. It's a juicy green, not a drying green. Which Hildegard also explicitly talks about like spiritual dryness and aridity of sin, and that like this greening is being part of the
the living nature and the joy of that. Yeah,
absolutely. I think that's probably a great. It feels like it's going to feel to me like Verdant is supposed to be talked about next at all times.
It's time.
Yeah. So looking at Veritas, there's the standard, right? This is greenness, which she originally describes in German as de grün, right? And this gets translated by her scribes as greening, and in time becomes this term called Veritas, which she owns the Latin of in time. Viridity, yes, but in the sense of green, vitality, fecundity, lushness, verdure, growth. But it is in part, and in whole, perhaps, it's symbolizing spiritual and physical health.
Yeah.
And this is a reflection of the living light's role in nature. And that is my phone alarm. I apologize. Just happens to be goading. But okay, so Veritas is it becomes central to all of her works, to Hildegard's works. It is the kind of base with which we're starting here. It's the power of plants to put forth leaves and fruit. In the same way, a comparison to the greenest branch, right? The Viridissima Virga, who's likened to the Virgin Mary. The Virgin will bear fruit that is Jesus in this way. In every moment of life, if we can find the Veritas and serve it, that is what will literally bear fruit, literally and figuratively bear fruit in our lives.
Yeah.
So it becomes the kind of guiding principle through which she serves. She does feel that it's like an attribute of the divine nature itself, and she goes into that into Scivias. But it's translated into many different ways, but it's one of those things that sometimes the best translation is no translation. Eventually Veritas is understood on its own terms, and there is kind of a homeostasis that is implied by this. It goes there, but
it's humoral and dynamic, right? Like it's about the body re-sustaining itself, rebalancing, right? I mean, it's literally humoral in terms of like, yes, 4 elements, 4 seasons, 4 humors, 4 major winds, even the 4 zones of the earth, kind of vaguely understood like that. And that this is also an expression of like God working through the earth. And so like medicine as a type of gardening isn't just like growing your drugs. It's also that like it's not just an analogy, right? It is, but it's also like plants and the elements of the garden as like, again, the microcosm and macrocosm within the moistures within the human body. But it's also explicitly kind of soteriological as well, right? This greenness not only is about God's natural world, but also but everything that's like spiritually creative and filled with the sudor, the sap of divine life, which she again expressly counterparts to the aridity of human sin. And there's some lovely Edenic stuff in it's not lovely. There's some lamenting Edenic stuff in Seu Curador. She talks about how this is the fall, that before that, again, this idea that like in the garden everyone is in perfect health, and it's because Adam consented to evil and relinquished good that he's made into a likeness of the earth, which he says produces, yes, good and useful herbs as well as bad and useless ones, and which has in itself both good and evil moistures. And she says, from tasting evil, the blood of the sons of Adam was turned into the poison of semen, out of which the sons of man are begotten, and therefore their flesh is ulcerated and permeable to disease. These sores and openings create a certain storm and smoky mixture in men, from which the phlegmata arise and coagulate, which then introduce diverse infirmities to the human body. All this arose from the first evil, which man began at the start, because if Adam had remained in paradise, he would have had the sweetest health, and the best dwelling place, just as the strongest balsam emits the best odor. But on the contrary, man now has within him poison and phlegm and diverse illnesses. So this is like expressly medical, like it's an etiology of etiology, right? But exactly has this sense of like the salvation of it as well. That participating in this greening gives an ability to associate with all that partakes of God's living presence, including like blossoming nature and the soot or the sweat or the sap that fills out leaves and shoots. And so it's an analogy, but also it's the actuality. It's not even just a metaphor. It's not a metaphor, right? It is what is happening. Found in a letter that she'd written to Adam the abbot, she says that the grace of God glitters like the sun and sends forth its gifts variously. In one way, wisdom, sapientia, another in viridity, and the third in moisture, humanity. And these are linked for her. That like it isn't just about the juiciness of things. It isn't just about the medicines of things. It's also about the inherent wisdom of them as well. And that again is part of how she compares, the Virgin Mary as the greenest branch, like you said. Yeah.
There's a lot. I mean, it's funny because of how much it echoes the kind of parado as the greening power of the sun, right? So almost honored greening force, you who roots in the sun, you who lights up in shining serenity within a wheel that earthly excellence fails to comprehend. You are enfolded in the weaving of divine mysteries. You redden like the dawn and you burn, flame of the sun. She also describes the life force of it as a living and fiery essence that glows in the beauty of the fields. She says that this force says, she responds in the first person, I shine in the water, I burn in the sun and the moon and the stars. Mine is that mysterious force of the invisible wind. I am the breath of all the living. So there's this constant hearkening back for an equilibrium to an Edenic state. Exactly. It's the green force that left Eden that is still present in creation, but it's like that quote a long time ago. I have to look up who said it. Everyone talks about putting the world in order. The earth is in order. It's for us to put ourselves in alignment with that order. But just like she says, the soul is for the body as the sap is for the tree, and the soul energies unfold as the tree unfolds its gestalt. Thus, the soul provides the inner solidity and the strength of the body.
That's great.
There's so much that she's obviously looking at, but there's this idea that the living light unfolds itself in creation as Viriditas. And that this relationship here, I mean, rooted in even like, she's Benedictine, right? So there's this ora et labora, the prayer and work thing that was there. And then she's going through all of this, and it's very, in true mystic fashion, she is looking for a way to exemplify how this happens. But there is this ora et labora, prayer and work is not in the words of the wise nuns at the Abbey, it's not meant to be two things. It is describing a unity of prayer and work through the separation of the activities of prayer and work, that you realize that they are the same. So there is, Hildegard is perhaps very non-dualist in her perceptions of how she does this theandrocosmic, worldview and ecology between God and humanity and the cosmos there. That there is, it is not just a medieval term for chlorophyll as has been proposed. Right. It is, in fact, although many might disagree with it, just based on what we've already talked about, is she's describing a feminine sustaining force in nature. The Shekhinah, after Jesus's death and the paraket rips and everything, the force that spreads out across the world is that same force.
Right. It's cosmological in a sense, right? The final chorus in her mystery musical Ordo Virtutem is in the beginning all creation greened. It's also explicitly linked in the Liber Divinorum Orpurum in the first section where she's talking about the opening of the Gospel of John, the incipit, which I've been looking at a lot recently because of its heavy use in dispossession, right? If you're going to pick a sacred text to read or to write on an amulet for someone, pick the one that says that God is words, the word of God is God. But she says how the heat of God's word sent by the prophet John made the aridity of human flesh green again. So it's categorically doing that, right?
It is exactly it's that thing that we talked about of this isn't the sun that scorches. This is not ariditas. This is not the making arid or making dry. That this is the sun that nourishes. So this is that it is not just the duality with that sin itself is ariditas, that separates from the moisture influencing the side of God that is moist, as Phoebe will say. But so many times we can say the word moist.
Juicy. Yeah. Obviously, because Sarah Higley is writing about the lingua ignota, she connects it to language again via that idea of talking about the Gospel of John and the sense of the links between greening and language and the Word of God. But she's got this wonderful passage where she's kind of answering this claim that the lingua ignota might just have been glossolalia, and it's like, no, glossopoeia is the making of language, right? Just like mythopoeia is the making of myth. She's not just tonguing ecstasis. She's like constructing something. She says, Higley says, green evokes the sense of new in English. To green language is to strip it of its withered bark. And she explicitly talks about how academia can often lend itself to the aridity of rigidity and like things that crumble and get dusty. She says this is doubtless the idea behind other people's take on why like virginal is so important to Hildegard's project. And Higley also says a green language is a sapling, new in a process of growth. There is something divine, as Hildegard understood it, about renaming the physical world and our spiritual concepts in unique euphonious words, giving a new body to humanity and nature. Viriditas thus calls to mind the visions Hildegard explicates in her Liber Divinorum Operum, wherein she compares the microcosm of human physiology to the macrocosm of God's creation, beautifully illustrated by the mandala structure surrounding the figure of man, who is also embraced by the figure of love. That's in the Rupertsberg manuscript. Again, like the speaking of it, the sharing of breath with the greening world is also part of the greening of ourselves. I think ties it together as not just a bunch of other stuff she was doing, right? Like there's a cohesive vision, it seems, to her sense of engaging with the world, and this, like you say, I think like this comparison to the wisdom of the Shekinah and things like that.
Which ties us in neatly into Puella, I woto argue. Because I mean, this is it's funny how new the trepidation is every single time. Not to rely solely on cross-cultural comparisons and of its homoform, right, which is Otura Meiji. But Otura Meiji does talk about spiritual awakening and enlightenment and the importance of peace, but it's a distinctly feminine movement forward, right? There's something coming out here that is hot as it is cold. It's a weird thing. It's a delicate time. In this specifically, there's a pursuit of very key concepts here, but there's also the cautions of naivete and deceit and the seduction of the world, that the white cloth is easily stained here again. The needing to pay understanding to the messenger as the genetrix of the message itself. It's not solely quoting something else. There's a lot of things here, even in the kind of very public interpretation of this Odu. But as always, I leave the geomantic interpretation here in a more classically geomantic sense to you. So do you want to how does Puella speak of what we've already been speaking about? I guess a little bit. I'll lead it in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a really helpful way of starting to frame it. The delicacy of action forward, the potential of both naivety and seduction, and like, yeah, I love that point, especially about attention to the messenger and the means by which things are transmitted as much as what's transmitted. Yeah, no, that's all really helpful for getting at the core of what it's about, which is framed through, again, this late medieval, early modern conception of the woman one, the token girl in the South. There are other figures that are also considered feminine or effeminate or feminizing, but puella is literally, in the Latin, the girl, translated as the maiden, sometimes as the wench or the lady. I like the hostess for it as well. And in general terms, it's talked about as a figure of amity, benevolence, gentle passion. We can also see a lot of stuff about like soft power and like queenly authority as distinct from kingly authority, but absolutely a figure of like the artist, the artisan, and the patron of the arts, the patroness of the arts. Beautiful craft, artistic integrity, as well as feminine wiles and wisdom, and the work that was either praised or consigned to women across history. So it's got a lot of stuff about like enriching felicity and friendship, like kind of embroidering the creative and the crafty and the fabulous, let's be fair. But also speaks of like managerial demands, of like grace under pressure, and also talks in some of its more like negative aspects of some decidedly kind of like Mean Girls drama of like gossip and henpecking and social jockeying, and like comparing our insides to other people's outsides, I guess. But it also can offer some real like wise counsel about like how to deal with that, as well as, warning a queer that's marked by that to try not to engage with that. You can talk about it in terms of like what it isn't as well. Like the reversal of it is poor. It's not boyish in any of those terms. Its inverse is rubious, so it's especially not martial. It's not either of the martial things, and it isn't about being out of control. There is a lot of like ways that these early modern texts kind of like iterate that dichotomy that gets called virgin whore between puella and rubius in a lot of senses. As a first witness, it's often about the importance of centering and grounding oneself in like a tangible social fabric. And again, it's very tied to like textile arts and things like that, attending to family, friends, kinship groups, both like personal and professional. I found that queerants who are kind of overly identifying with the kind of image of the princess locked in her tower can be like helpfully encouraged to like renew efforts to like cast fresh social circles and things like that. As a second witness, there's a lot of like stepping into your own power, a lot of like folding what we've recently learned into our actual crafts and activities, continuing to tend the cultivated garden of our lives. And so there's a bunch of ways that like it can absolutely form like difficulties or mark those kinds of difficulties, that like dedication to social niceties and matchmaking can veer into various manners of conflict avoidance, or even like manipulative behaviors, either conscious or unconscious, that like care for your guests and their secrets can also itself foment significant gossip. But I think we can read out, hopefully dragging some of, the gender essentialism that's in these early modern texts into, a more useful context of what to do with that it can, it can signify like a damsel in distress, but also like a career woman making her own way. It's the dedicated artisan, as well as the ever capable like matronly caregiver. And I think there's that presence of it doing both, that like, whether you're talking about its like expressions in terms of being a lady of the flowers, a lady of the birds, textile arts, as I said, music, dance, song, cosmetics, definitely like green thumbed, and a vitality in the spiritual as well as material blossoming. So like big viriditas stuff going on there, and the stuff we hold close to our breasts that still stirs the senses and keeps us young at heart. In terms of like its form, I think we can We can look at it like a seamstress's needle, or the scales of Libra that it's often corresponded to, or even like the hand mirror of Venus, or even the glyph of Venus herself. It's expansive air and focused fire, water, and earth, if you want to use those terms for it. I think as the hostess, they invite others to share their thoughts and opinions and intimacies with this kind of active, willful, attention and care and grace. That's a term that gets used an awful lot. And also this idea that there might be potentially a little overmoved by the speech and opinion of others in its form. I think that's there in that, like, quote, passive airline.
It's interesting tying that into like the greenest branch thing of the tropism, right? That like hearing the loudest voice in the room and moving towards it. Of like there's divine nature, and then there is the impulse created by divine nature that makes us want to move towards the dominant force, and sometimes that dominant force is not one that serves the ultimate goal. So that I understand the kind of timidity or the need to understand the messenger, as we talked about.
That
idea of naivete / curiosity that is so wholly perfect unto itself, but the world at the start of creation is a world of mistakes about to happen. If we can engage with it, we know that mistakes are going to happen, and we can correct them, we can move with them. But if we pretend that it's always perfect, then we've already lost the battle. Which is interesting because that kind of speaks to the tarot card in that way, as far as like, its reversed meanings of abuse of power, breakdown, poor counsel, like where the messenger becomes devoid of practicality.
I am the voice of God.
Yeah, where it becomes about something other, the trappings of religion, as opposed to the method or aim of religion, as it were.
Right, the kernel and not the nut. Yeah.
Yeah. Or in very modern parlance, when spirituality turns to religion. Which is an interesting, examining that trend as in everyday Western speech as, evidence of Spiritism's finagling through our collective consciousness through the last 200 years. Not 200 years, but 2 centuries. There we go. So the Hierophant as, tradition and convention, even marriage. This is more of a marriage card than the Lovers, right? This is falling into line with convention. Not just religious ones, but like all ways of like of social norms potentially as well, and certainly like political ones. Yes, absolutely. And like this idea of the road between extremes that is proposed here. The cross here is a different cross on the Rider-Waite card than normal, right? Where there's
the triple cross.
It's a triple cross, which is like we've even gone past the Orthodox here. It almost feels like a key in some efforts. So many people will say an ancient key there. But there's even this time of this card is sometimes directly called Jupiter.
In the decks where either Catholics didn't like having the literal Pope there because they considered it sacrilege, or non-Catholics weren't interested in lending this thing any authority. You see like the Bessignon deck in German-speaking Protestant areas in eastern France and Germany and Switzerland has Jupiter as like the highest-ranking Roman god. In Belgium and northern France, the Van der Boer deck shows Bacchus as well, the Roman god of wine. Very different, right?
Yeah, but I mean, if you're a Borgia Pope, why not? There's something. I mean, this is obviously the exoteric to the esoteric of the High Priestess. Yeah. And I say that very soundly. I'm sorry. This in classical tarot education, post Rider-Waite. That is how this card is viewed. Sacredness, orthodoxy. Just
not spiritual intuition. Yeah.
But it's interesting because the Hierophant itself is associated with Taurus and Venus, which is like the most rooted down in the earth, which is still I have. So the amassing of wealth and land and things like that is there. But this card is interesting because it has so much Catholic baggage, as you're saying, that this is really like, like, oh, you've become a Papist.
Well, it just hasn't remained unchanged for like 2,000 years. Like there's variations, and sometimes it's Jupiter instead. But on the whole, it's the most obvious representation of the tarot's images reflecting like important medieval things. Whether that's things that medieval people thought were important or like literal institutions, and all of that stuff representing the Pope's, that specifically the Pope's authority, the triple tiara, the triple staff, the keys, connoting a bunch of different things. And sometimes he's holding a big key in one or two of the decks, at least crossed at his feet for Peter, and again like the establishment of the rock of the church, as well as like the key of mysteries, and that sense of moving from specifically the Pope, capital T, capital P, to the Grand Hierophant is again Uncle Alphonse as Eliphas Levi in 1856, talking about him sitting between the two pillars of Hermes and Solomon, and presides over the sacred mysteries in the ancient world. So that kind of broadening out from specific, like you say, like Catholic baggage, essentially. And then from there, you get the Golden Dawn, yes, assigning Taurus, but also importantly, their take on the Hebrew letter Vav as nail. So we have this idea of like stability and tradition, that which is nailed down, but it's still talking about some Christological stuff when we're talking about the power of nails, right? And the Pope's also renamed as the Magus of the Eternal Gods, and talked about as a teacher and even channeler of occult wisdom. But it's channeler in the sense of like the official interpretations. I think that's fair to say. And then, by the Rider-Waite-Smith, we get the keys of St. Peter returning, and the kind of half mangling of the W at the top of his crown is also meant to be Vav, and the nail is the link between the human and the divine. As well as like more explicitly bringing in some like, but also this is ritual magic as well as religion with the red roses and the white lilies, which are referencing the magician, but also to the Golden Dawn ceremonies where those flowers had an awful lot of particular meaning and were often either explicitly present or painted on things.
There's also a school of thought that will look at the kind of like the Catholic baggaging of this image, all right, of talking about it as knowledge that you innately have, knowledge, not intuition, the kind of doctrinal knowledge that is in you that you are able to teach, and that can also be passed down through the blood. So this is a card of ancestry for some people because of two tonsured men, which is interesting because like you have the least, I mean, it's knowledge that's passed down. So this is culture. This is ancestry as a vehicle for, the democracy of the dead, not necessarily that which nurtures you, but that which cultures you. The petri dish you grew up in. I do think there's also, I know people that will look at this, and it could be interesting for you on that side of that, because there are the two men there serving the Pope, that this is the geometric shield or the Tre of Ifa, right?
The witnesses and the judge.
And that I know people that will use this card as a flag of if this card keeps coming up, that maybe geomancy does provide an option of further investigation.
Oh, that's awesome.
Which is always great when divination systems can allow for like, who might be better at talking to you specifically.
Right. Good doctors.
Good
doctors refer to specialists. Yeah, absolutely. I like that a lot.
So I think there's a lot of things that go there that's interesting, right? It can be that you have to teach or that you're being taught. It could be a call to ancestry. It could be a call to geomancy. It could be a call to many things. But there's an institution that's being talked about here. Whether that institution is tradition itself or the tradition of tradition, the business of tradition, is I think again, tarot without contextualization is very difficult for me to conceive of. Yes, we can do averse and reverse, but like also it depends on the cards that are around it for me. But I do think there's something interesting about this discussion of areditas, viriditas, and the need of what the Hierophant itself is the go-between the divine and the person. So there is somebody who is not inviting you to become them and participate in this knowledge as the high priestess is said to, but someone who is perhaps standing in between you and the knowledge that through teaching, we actually allow the student to replace us.
Right.
And to invite them into the tradition of the specific knowledge that we are teaching and allow them access to what we have access to as teachers through education, through trust in the teacher and perhaps the system. But that is, of course, not always the case, because it is very easy to mistake the words of the messenger for the messenger's words.
Yeah, the idea that like teaching isn't just about the preservation of tradition, but also the growth of it. That that you are teaching so that someone replaces you, not just so there's someone else doing the thing, not in the self-perpetuating cycle of academia necessarily of like learning to be a teacher so you can teach other people, but this sense of education like allows a growth and a like dare I say like a greening, like natural evolution of the thing. Again, that tradition isn't static, that it's something that like lives and breathes. I think that's really important. Like the sense of like the requirement of containers for that thing. That's where the institutionalizing comes in. Hopefully not in the sense of the strictures of the white jacket with the long fashionable sleeves, but the idea of like having to of a thing worth carrying on doing is worth carrying on doing properly, in some sense. I hope.
And sorry.
I'm also just struck. I'm half remembering it, but like this thing about ancestry and a greening development makes me think of the issue of Alan Moore's Promethea, where he does the tarot, which it goes full didactic, and is, if I'm remembering it right, it's like it's a whole cosmology. So he maps the entire history of the cosmos. So like the Fool is the Big Bang. I think he says that like he makes the emperor like gravity, and I think by the time he gets to the Hierophant, he says it's the process of evolution itself that allows us to realize that we emerged from nature, that we weren't just plonked here, and that like that ancestry extends beyond the human into like the animal and into like the last universal common ancestor and things like that. And just that idea that like the tradition of innovation is one of like natural mutation and development as well.
I really like that. I like that it brings in teaching in that way. The teaching as an evolution of the common stock of knowledge.
Yeah, not just by rote or into a tabula rasa, into a blank slate, but like helping people work stuff out better for themselves as part of something.
Well, if we take the ultimate hierophant in the modern era, right, Cyprian himself, right, going into the cave at Salamanca, and the other myths that are associated with that, where two people enter, one person leaves, type of thing, of like you have to stay the whole time to learn everything, meaning blessing and curse. As it goes, and oftentimes the things that are blessings are taught first, but curse becomes a thing of you can't cure a thing if you don't know what it is. And this notion of the Hierophant then, or as the model teacher or Cyprian, is that there is this challenge there whereby the teacher becomes so locked in their own power that they do not share the things that would elevate the student or allow the student to surpass them. But at the same time, the father figure, the quote unquote good father, the good parent, is someone who would want their children to surpass them in wealth, stability, knowledge, and so forth, moving forward. So there is a balance there, I think, between the upright and the averse meanings here, like those who get, and Cyprian's an excellent model for this discussion, right? Of like the landmarks that we see in Cyprian are oftentimes that asshole-ish teacher. That is like ultimate power, but this really is a reflection of the same people who are coming to him. In many ways, and that when we perhaps to complicate that through the groups that work with him in kind of the very Quimbanda, curanderismo, and other traditions where your attitude towards spirits reflects your attitude towards your own life. It is not necessarily inner work, but there will be an inner work that is proposed through the constant work that you do. But that the transformation of ourselves to be okay with the teacher being a certain way will actually transform the teacher. Teacher us. and you were there, and you were there, and you were there, and you were there. But
Yeah,
I think that there is something to that asshole-ish nature of Cipriano, for instance, as being part and parcel of the guardian at the threshold. That is this last da'at leap right into the supernal three, because we're dealing with something else here. Like the Hierophant is doing something strange, that can guard knowledge but also share it so lovingly. If there is the movement of the spirit, if there is an acknowledgement of the greening force, perhaps, if the high priestess is not just hidden away, and what is between ultimately the high priestess and the Hierophant is its own interesting side of things. It's like, that's anyway.
Yeah, for sure.
In all of that too, there's this lovely kind of relationship between the same thing that we were talking about earlier, I guess, or the conceit of the conceit, within acting or magic, the behaving as if, or the not of the not. But dear Miss Sybil Leek,
there we go.
A fantastical relationship with the truth, that the wide perception of her is that she was either in on the joke or a complete fraud. And at the same time, by modern parlance, modern times, she's also remembered as kind of like an alternative to the Gardnerian Alexandrian stream. That this was a woman who, by the witchcraft mythology of the time, was one of the Council of Nine, the nine covens established by Pickinghall, George. So there's this whole lore within that, right? That like he's another person to talk about another time, even though what we talk about right here might be all there is to say about him. But that old George, Pickinghall, was an English cuttingman, an agricultural dude in Essex, and he became, especially like Eric Maple says, he was a master of a supposed group of witches traditionally associated with the Canuden. My pronunciation is terrible there.
Canuden.
Okay, great. And was carrying out more of a typical like cunning man, curing minor ailments and finding lost property and that type of things. And there are people like Bill Little, who is not widely accepted amongst modern Wiccans, but he does claim that he is a source of modern Wicca and portrayed him as kind of modernizing hereditary witchcraft, and founded 9 covens and introduced the novelty of female leadership into British witchcraft. And then the 9 covens were reputedly reassembled by Pickinghall in approximately 1840. Among the latter members of the groups were modern witchcraft people like Crowley, Gardner, Valiente, Sybil Leek, all one who formed their own groups. Supposedly Pickinghall is a major player in 19th century esoteric circles. Or he's just a cunning man that we have a name of, and therefore linked to cunning men's. Right. So Sybil Leek is 1922, 1982. She died here in the States in Florida. She was a New Yorker for a brief minute. But she, witch, astrologer, psychic, author, very, for her time period, pretty good on making books.
Yeah, at least 22.
Yeah. Britain's most famous witch, by the BBC. The one that I always remember her for, despite having a few of her books as a young twitch, was Mr. Hotfoot Jackson, her jackdaw, that was always on her shoulder in the pictures. And she has this large crystal necklace that she claims was given to her by her Russian grandmother, who was a psychic as well, which plays it. It's so wonderfully 60s, 70s, like craft in a oh, it's so hard because I don't want the deceit, but the romanticization and the relationship with creating a story is like delicious. Like I want that life story. I want her, like when we go back and read like Shadowlands, like and you read about the author's life, her very ordinary life versus the autobiography she writes in Shadowland as a spiritualist. I want the autobiography she writes. I can acknowledge that it's a work of fiction, but the fiction is, I mean, what witch doesn't love a story?
Right. Right.
So
She does like set this model of like modern independent professional witch slash occult personality to a big extent, right? Like, the Liber Wiki refers to her occupation as white witch, antiques dealer, author, and television personality. Right? Which, like, I think that feels accurate, right?
The oddities market from the beginning.
Yeah. She
opened 3 stores at once.
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, so she's born February 22nd, 1922, although there's some dispute about that because her funeral card says 1917. So she's already lied about her age. And she's born in Staffordshire.
Stoke-on-Trent,
And so she's from an aristocratic or a family that has money. Might not be like high aristocrats, but she traces her ancestry back to Molly Lee, who died in 1746 after being accused of witchcraft, and possibly back to 12th century witches from Southern Ireland. I say this with a questioning tone. Ireland? Southern Ireland? From an early age, therefore, she grew up around New Forest and the area of Hampshire, which New Forest, of course, is significant because this is where Gardner supposedly was initiated into, allegedly. Allegedly sounds technical and legal, and supposedly sounds like I have an opinion about it. I'll just allegedly initiated into the New Forest Coven of Witches, which was Sybil Leek runs away at one point, in my memory of it. Maybe she didn't run away, but she spends a year, possibly more, possibly less, with the quote gypsies of the New Forest, which gets edited to specifically Romany in modern site retellings of things, but that because she lived with them for a year, she knows New Forest very well, and that she was initiated into the same coven that initiated Gerald Gardner. So we found a Sanderian trump card here. Like Alexander does the my grandma initiated. He finally gets a copy of the Gardnerian Book of Shadows, and they can't say it's not that because it blows the cover of the wink wink nudge nudge that is also there in Masonry. And let's be clear, and Americans sometimes miss that part, that we know that Masonry is not the ancient Illuminati going back into time immemorial, but it sure is fun to pretend and to do ritual as if it is. Here she there's this side of it of I was initiated into the same coven that initiated him. We have different interpretations, of course, of how to be a witch, but she played into the Murrayist idea, and she meets some people and manipulates those things. She marries a guy who's 24 years her senior. They travel around Europe for 2 years, or extended honeymoon everywhere. But only 2 years later, he dies. And so she returns back home, lives with her grandma, and then her grandmother supposedly ushers her off to a French coven at Georges de Loup in the hills above Nice, to replace a distant relative of hers who was supposed to be a high priestess, but had passed. So Sybil went and spent time as high priestess of that coven. And this keeps going, right? She goes back to England. She moves with an acquaintance in Lyndhurst in the New Forest. And that's when she went to live with the quote gypsies in the forest. And then she gets the rituals of the Horsa coven in the New Forest, which they claim exists for over 700 years. And for a short time, she was their high priestess and therefore a member of the 9 Covens Council established by Pickinall. So it is the mythology, her own mythology, mythologization of her past. Beautiful cup of tea stories, right?
Yeah.
She has authority. And she's also someone who invites the press and then gets so tired of the press. And she's just like, I don't know why you're asking me these questions. They're like, man, you invited us here. And so it's hard because she becomes the village witch, right? And their landlord refuses to renew the lease.
Yeah, in Burley, right? Yeah, she opens up like three. She's antique shop in Ringwood, in Somerset, and then one actually in Burley where she moves. And then yeah, the landlord who is apparently expressing this general sense of like, we don't really like all these journalists and witchcraft tourists turning up in our village. Get out.
Yeah, so she runs to the States.
Mm-hmm.
And she brings her children eventually, but she has this reputation as a psychic astrologer. She pushed a book on phrenology. I have a copy of it. This is one of those things, palmistry. She was able to, or she created decoys and able to attend secret coven meetings. Okay, so there's all these things happening. She comes to New York. She meets Hans Holzer. She starts investigating psychic phenomena and goes on to radio programs and things like that. She moves to Los Angeles, meets Israel Regardie. I'm going to make 5,000 pronunciations of that. And therefore becomes an authority on Kabbalah and ritual magic because she spends her spare time doing Golden Dawn rituals with Israel Regardie. And so eventually she moves to Florida, which she describes her area in Florida. And I'm sorry that this is impure. I love this woman. I think I'm not. If it sounds like I'm like what the fuck, I am still what the fucking but like I have mad respect for this woman. But she describes her little patch of Florida as reminiscent of Nice, of the French Riviera. And there's times there I was like, I do like that she was like I don't have to be naked in rituals, like the Gardnerians and the Alexandrians.
Yeah, that's a big like clash, right? Like big critic of ritual nudity and also on record disapproving of like entheogens and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And she thought cursing was lovely. She was pro-environment and like anti-people.
Yeah, she publishes both a book on curses and a book on like driving out the devil, like get them coming and get them going. Yeah,
absolutely.
Also stuff on like we said, like astrology, numerology, fortune telling of various sorts, things like the complete art of witchcraft, as well as stuff on dreams, faith healing, reincarnation. She's like, she's doing that. That life.
Yeah, she was a figure for sure. Like she was one of the first people to come out, and it was also a woman coming out as well. So like I have to take the attacks on her also, like people weren't attacking Gardner and Sanders as much as they were women like Sybil Leek. They were attacked, believe me. Like all of witchcraft was under strict eye, as it were. Yeah. But it's interesting. So you do get the Horsa tradition, which is still practicing, is still out there, and they have specific views within their ideas of witchcraft. But they do believe that they are practicing a witchcraft that is transmitted by Sybil to a woman named Grace, who and then from practicing a version of the New Forest covens. That's the Horsa coven's view, I believe, on where she gets her authority from. A lot of people, that's not necessarily the case, right? That it wasn't Dorothy Clutterbuck that trained or initiated Sybil in her witchcraft, but that whatever. There's a lot of things going on. I think the lineage in witchcraft is an interesting side of things. I've always appreciated Valiente's extreme honesty and like, nope. Found a man, went to him. It was Gardner, wrote half his book of shadows for him, disagree with him, went and studied with Evan Johnson, went to these other things, like made up a lot of stuff, and she's still the mother of modern witchcraft because of her honesty. So like, I don't think necessarily you have to lie, but it does remind me of the Castaneda principle of like, in order to be a good sorcerer, you have to move away from anybody and everything that ever knew you. Sit there and go like, you're not a witch, Sybil. We know your parents.
Right. The difficulty of enshrining the village witch and then the reality of what that actually is. That's an interesting model.
And I do offer, for those that are such to offer it to, that Sybil Lick is a fantastic micro niche drag queen name. But I would be the only one that's like, that's a fantastic name, probably, if I ever thought. Wow.
So I was rooting through Complete Art a little bit. There's a wonderful framing at the beginning, which again has her as introduces her as Sybil Leek is the real-life soul sister of Samantha Stevens, TV's warm-hearted witch in the popular program Bewitched, which again feels like another take on all those October articles about like how did someone phrase it? Witches don't do this common misconception; they do this other thing that is also a misconception. But it also frames, rather than cast spells to destroy her enemies, put curses on inefficient hotel help, or turn photographers into toads, Dame Sybil prefers to use her time and talents convincing a sensation-seeking public that some witches don't use their powers to practice the demonic arts of sorcery, voodooism, and black magic. Instead, they seek to aid human beings, and with a family tradition of witchcraft more than 800 years long behind her, she knows how. So this theme of distinguishing her model of witchcraft, which she pretty much frames as magic for good, from black magic, seems to run right the way through at least that book. And she's got some stuff to say about power, essentially. She talks about how it's a motivating force in occult practice, but then kind of says that she thinks witches are supposed to have more respect for power, as not minding having it, but preferring not to use it, which again makes me think of that quote from Brennan Lee Mulligan about like, power exists. Power should make you tired and sad. And anyone that wants to like cling on to that too hard, that, that upside down of the Hierophant, should be suspect. And she frames explicitly that like black magicians exult in power, that it's never enough. And this very traditional model of the quote black magician of preparing to go to any excess and enjoying power over people for its own sake. And she compares that to kindness and humility, and contrasts it to sympathy and empathy and selflessness. And also specifically, even as someone who is like quite happy to curse, talks about how black magicians will rationalize their own abilities and lack of self-examination with their convincing themselves that it's good and fine for them to kill with magic, and exalting their own evil as opposed to working for the common good. And she even explicitly raises, I don't think she names LaVey, but talks about the classic example of this present cult of Satanism that has flared up on the west coast of America, which creates a very fine rational case to create the illusion that lust is man's needful motivation. And there's even some like modern apocalypticism where she says like the danger is that now, in times when so many people are worried that there may not be a tomorrow or that they may not see a tomorrow, the idea of a free-for-all last-minute orgy is very appealing. Yeah, she's also like, at least in Complete Art, very big into this concept of like there aren't active people doing wicked magic, very organized in the world. She says, to make the mistake of thinking that black magicians do not exist today is one of the most foolish of all premises. I would say that the dark forces are gathering now at a much greater rate than ever since the Middle Ages. They also have the advantage of being much more organized.
Yeah.
So it's positing a model about what this is for and what we're doing with these powers as well. As well as kind of a little bit of scaremongering about like, if you're not with us, you're against us, and the evil magicians are amassing. And she even compares it to like fascism explicitly, saying that like that's where that kind of ideology goes, of like, I can, that might is right, and that I can do what I want, and brings up the notions of like free will and ensuring that that her model of like good witchcraft avoids dictatorship, and ensures that people are happy, that that they venerate occult forces and powers, they don't try and control them, and those kinds of models as well, which is I don't want to say perennial idea, but you see a version of that cropping up even in like modern historians of magic and stuff like Patrick Curry, who yes, wrote like Prophecy and Power, which is a great take on early modern English astrology and its tensions with emergent science, and puts forward this idea of like that the means of making scientific truth making change away from astrology just by a bunch of elites, just as early modern people learn astrology, and so decide to use something that just so happens to be expensive and the preserves of those elites to say, no, this is proper knowledge. It's an inversion of the Enlightenment as not this like grand model of progress, but rather as a centralization of power and truth making. And Curry even says in later books, like he distinguishes magic as always having power over the natural world with enchantment, which he brings back to its roots in cantare, right, and charming of finding oneself in a song. And so that idea of like, are we engaging? Are we part of the viriditas, or are we are we drying other people out with our power over rather than power to?
Yes, one of the things I do like about Leek was, there's kind of an ecological nod and this understanding of spirit of place that was not present as much in early Wicca in the published accounts, right? There's this kind of harkening back to a pastoral nostalgia of like, well, what is arguably called carpet Wicca now, right? Of like, we can recreate this pastoral religion in anywhere we need to through the use of the magic circle, and kind of take us back to a place outside of time, but is still curiously like 19th century Midlands. But that she did have a prayer for the New Forest itself, and encouraged, from what I understand, a prayer for the land itself, that the where you are doing ritual should benefit the where you are doing ritual, which is a simple concept, but a profound one, especially since we don't see it in the record as easily.
Yeah.
We see a lot of harkening back, but we don't necessarily see a stewardship of the land, which is one of the hallmarks of again, traditional craft prides itself on a strong relationship with the land you're on.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the reasons she's considered, even though she's pulling so much from Wicca, there's still a kind of hierophantic transmission here happening, where Sybil's kind of essence kind of gets invoked as one of the mothers of alternative to Wicca craft.
Yeah, and that idea of like hierophantic transmission, that it really explicitly mentioned, because there's also, a thing that looks, or I think we can quote as a little bit of like self-reflection. It's one thing to say, oh, I do the good magic and those people over there do the bad magic, right? The other magicians, as Jake liked to put it, right? Those that get accused of doing the bad or the wicked thing. But also, there's a little bit of reflection in Complete Art of Witchcraft about like what it is to teach magic at all. And she actually says, in a world hating itself, always seeing a society as a menace, we should be increasingly careful about how we approach the subject of magic. After many years in my own life of fiercely hoping that all things could be revealed and so be examined by others, I now wonder if this is the right thing to do. To give magical powers to everyone by instructing them seems a bit like giving a child a bomb to play with and showing him how to pull the pin out. Also, the danger in teaching witchcraft today is that we are not in an age, is that we are in an age when everyone wants everything instantly and is not prepared to wait or go through what she calls a guru system of teaching, which I regard as so important. Correspondence courses flourish and many do some good in basic teaching, but the full feeling for witchcraft and its involvement with life can only be attained by the personalized teaching of a few selected students.
Yeah. The naivete in teaching.
Well, there's also that like
of it all.
There's also a little bit of that element of like, oh, why are you asking me this? Because you invited me to ask you these questions, right? It's in a book teaching the complete art of witchcraft, right? Yeah. So there is a little bit of a like, I couldn't possibly, there's a little bit of like, these are only for the trusted few, which can be as genuine as it can be a means of further stoking interest in your forbidden closet of mystery, right?
Yeah. good night. No,
Well, that is all our topics.
yeah, that is, we have talked the topics, the toxicity of the talk. No, it's interesting. I do think there's with Sybil, I think that there is a resonance with Hildegard. I won't say the source of Sybil's material quite as much, but just the celebrity nature of things. There's a resonance there, and trying to be a witch in a witchcraft still dominated by male public figures during that time is quite interesting too. There were not as many alternatives yet. Fantastical relationship with the truth. In modern hindsight, I don't falter for it. I do wish that people could be more honest, though, and it is what it is. But I think that part of being part of that legacy, part of that teaching is being honest with how and where you get your information.
Yeah,
I don't think any modern student expects someone to have, the clouds parted and they received information sacrosanct, intact, and perfect iambic pentameter. That it is okay to say, no, I in fact spent the better part of 3 weeks not sleeping writing this thing out. Let's try it out.
The difference between being talked about however many centuries later because you span a fantastic yarn and because you actually gave people not just your own understanding, but the means to cultivate and further root and blossom in their own. Like there's a difference there.
Yeah. What's her spell is like up flame, higher fire is like this, like that's her fire raising spell. I remember it. Not to be confused with higher burning fire, making music like a choir from Legend. So okay. We have indeed talked the talk and whacked the whack.
Green the green.
Green the das grün of things. Happy Hildegardmas, Al.
Happy Hildegardmas, Jesse.
Yes. Yeah. Still kind of curious to see the overlaps of Buer and Meramael, and how they all might relate to Curador. Nettle is such an interesting medicine. I'm glad we talked about it. Just the stinging nature that this too can actually bring medicine. It's the surgeon, right? It is the thing that cuts away or causes pain in order to cure. And so becomes a perfect metaphor for this kind of healing and revivifying of ourselves, or to remember that we have to align ourselves with the order of the world, which is, in Hildegard's term, veriditas, that flows through everything, that we might transmit wisdom in addition to knowledge when we understand our relationship with the Hierophant and the relationship with the concupiscence of knowledge itself in Puella, that yarns are good, and certainly the essence of the message is what's important, but that strong historical figures like Sybil Leek are important to the record, and Mr. Hotfoot Jackson, and that the tears of the sun remind us that the great mystery of everything is green. It's Viridian, and just gonna put a T-shirt out that says Hildegard was right.
Love it. I'm reminded of so many things in Bruce Smith's Key of Green that I know we've both been really into, where he mentions, I mean, it's a history of green, and everything in it. It's ecological context. It's all sorts of stuff. But the thing that's standing out for me right now is he mentions that not just maps of space prior to the Hubble telescope, but like those models of the cosmos that Hildegard was also big on supervising. with these microcosms and macrocosms, when we have the earth in the center and the microcosm and macrocosm of man and the Holy Spirit and God and so on, the space isn't black, it's green. That like the field of possibility, that the medium by which the rays suffuse from the out, from the planets down into the various layers of the earth and through the aerial kingdoms and things, is itself a greening. That like to earlier, to in many like worlds, color cultures, green and blue aren't distinguished in various ways. That the green isn't just beneath us; it's above us as well and around us, and isn't just what suffuses; it's what suffusing things suffuse through.
The color of the liquid nature of reality.
Yeah. Yep. It's eat your greens all the way down and all the way up. Yeah.
Well, with that, lost in greenness, I toss the salad until next episode.
Yep. Please check us out on the site. We'll be putting this up on the YouTubes as well. We have our Facebook group, Folk Necromancy. If you want to come get necrofancy with us, and
please sign up for the mailing list on Speakeasy of the Dead. We'll hopefully have another one before the end of the year.
Yeah. Speaking of necrofancy, that would be that's wonderful. Thank you to Cooper for all his work gardening these weedy words of ours into a nicely edited thing. Thanks, Coop. Really appreciate you.
A little green regulation.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, we will see you for episode the 40th in October.
The big 4-0. All right. Well, thanks everyone. May your leeks be green and your greening leek. The sap of juicy inspiration and creativity. Thanks again, Jesse.
Moist.
Moist. Enunciate.
Right.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you everyone. Farewell.
Take care.